Hmm. All right. I think we're live. Hello. How's it going? Yeah, so obviously let me know if you can't hear me, if you can't see me, anything like that. Yeah, today I just want to do a little impromptu response slash like debate analysis of Dave Smith's debate at the whole forum here. Because I've been going over a lot of these videos, these streams, and everything, which Dave has been in, to get clips and information, data for my upcoming video on Dave Smith. So I thought I would just share some of my thoughts that I've been having on this video in particular. Are we still here? Not sure if this is actually getting through to my thing. It's saying I'm live, so whatever, I'm sure I'll... Ah, there we go, now the thing's coming through. Okay, right, so, yeah, let's get into it.
Welcome to the SOA Forum. We are pleased to be debating the issue, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. Speaking for the affirmative, Dave.
Yeah, so immigration restrictions make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. I believe I've got that written down somewhere. And yes, I think my confusion before, thank you Gameholics, I think my confusion from before is because there's actually like a huge-ass fucking delay from my end and what I'm seeing on Restream to what's actually going out to YouTube, so it's like minutes later people are actually able to respond to me. Yeah, let's see. Nowrasteh debate. Yes, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. That's a high barrier that Dave's got to cross here.
Dave Smith. Dave, please come to the stage. Speaking for the negative, Alex Nowrasteh. Alex, please come to the stage. Watch here.
I think I will say, off the bat, that I was not going into this debate with high hopes for Alex Nowrasteh. He seems to be a lot more on the sort of Cato, the GDP will go up if we invite infinite immigrants type of argument. But he did pleasantly surprise me when I was watching this before, and I've since been pleasantly surprised by some of the arguments he's making on Twitter. Of course, the neo-prags are making it very easy for these old prags to come off as like the most principled motherfucker you know, because they're just being so drastically unprincipled on this topic. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Zulu, I know you view non-libertarians as believing in evil, but do you consider them at large to be bad people by label? Well, bad people in a certain aspect, yes. I think most people are largely bad. Obviously, a lot of people, they try and be honest, they try and be, they're not gonna, spit on you and punch you in the face if you see them in public. But most people will advocate violence be used against you because you don't do things their way. Most people will adopt a whole host of really terrible ideas which are just destructive of humanity. Now, of course, somewhat thankfully, most people aren't willing to actually do it themselves, so you can have somewhat of a civil intercourse with them. Yeah, that is always there.
Dave, you have 15 minutes to make your case. Please close the voting. Lucas, take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Jim. Hey, what's up, guys? How's everybody doing? Thank you guys very much for coming out. Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Alex, for being here. I used to be at like every Soho Forum debate back in a time when I had less commitments and babies. And so this is very nice to be back, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces. Me and, look, I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with me, but it's nice to do one debate.
He's gonna just waffle for a bit. I'm just gonna do like a way to, no, it's not, I don't think it's there. It's playback. So I'm just gonna make this a little bit faster, because Jesus Christ.
Where I'm not going to piss off the Jews. You know what I mean? Like, that's these days. Okay, sorry. But you guys got the whole thing about the Jews. Anyway, okay. So this is, me and Alex have, over the years, we have traded some not so friendly tweets back and forth, but I do want to start by saying that I really am grateful to Alex for coming here today. Even when we were not getting along on Twitter, I've always genuinely respected Alex's intelligence, and I think he is somebody who really has a mastery of the data on this issue, unlike many others. And I think this is an issue that maybe the one thing me and Alex would agree on is that it's an issue that's really important that libertarians get right, especially today, because this is the issue that's gotten the sitting president of the United States of America elected twice. It was the central issues of his campaign. According to almost all of the opinion polls through the 2024 presidential election, immigration was either number one or number two. And so the question before us tonight is whether libertarians ought to support restrictions on immigration, or at least in some categories. So I would start with this. It's something that kind of everybody in the room knows already, but the real...
Yeah, so this is going to be Dave's theory of libertarianism, his grand knowledge of theory, which he keeps telling us all about, how he's so good at the libertarianism 101. He knows it back to front. So let's see his grand starting point for libertarianism here.
Really, the foundational principle of libertarianism is all orbits around voluntarism, voluntary exchanges. Now, people will start at different starting points, but basically that's what it is to be a libertarian.
Okay, so that's off to a real bad start. Now, when did this debate happen? A couple months ago, I think. So he's off to a real bad start. He thinks the foundation of libertarianism is voluntary exchanges. So, I mean, he'll elaborate, of course, but I'm not loving this start, because what makes an exchange voluntary? Well, you need to have some antecedent property theory and some antecedent and to get your property theory, you need some antecedent answer as to what to do with conflicts. So this is all very... He's kind of jumped way up into a remote derivation from what is properly the foundation, the non-aggression principle, into, and therefore exchanges should be voluntary. But then he's taken this, he's ripped this from up on high and used it as the foundation. Now this is going to present some problems. If he was up against anybody with like a moderate background in philosophy, they would immediately just say, okay, well, what does it mean for an exchange to be voluntary? They both agree to it. Okay, so I agree that I own you. Do I now own you? Yes. So, okay, so, and then you get into the voluntary slavery point. It's like, okay, well, 10 of us, we all agree that we're going to own that guy, and he doesn't agree. Is that voluntary? Because we all agreed. So it must be voluntary because we agreed to it. He's just being a stick in the mud. It doesn't matter. So it's like, you need to have a notion of what it means to agree, because when does it matter that somebody agrees? Because libertarians would always say, well, they might say like, well, that one guy, he didn't agree to it. It's like, okay, well then, you wanting to smoke meth that you bought off that guy, well, I didn't agree to that. So suddenly this is not voluntary that you smoking meth, because I didn't agree to it. It's like, okay, well, sometimes agreement matters, sometimes it doesn't. So when does it matter? When that's like very, You need to have already answered that before you get to, and voluntary exchange is good. So that's a very bad starting point.
To believe in. Even things like property rights, the non-aggression principle, all of them are essentially built around the idea that we prefer voluntary exchange and we reject coercion.
Now, did you catch that one? He says, he elaborated on what he means by voluntary exchange being the root. He said even things like property rights and the non-aggression principle, you know, any sensible libertarian would have the non-aggression principle be as fundamental as you can get. No, that's actually derived from this notion of voluntary exchanges. He said that it's all built around this idea that we prefer voluntary exchanges to aggression. Is that the root? That we just prefer it? Like this is the thing he was getting into in his debate with Andrew Wilson, where Andrew Wilson was saying, well, I think it's a subjective based morality. And it's like, Dave is not refuting that here. He seems to be completely endorsing that this is just a subjective morality. It's like, okay, well, if you were to really interrogate Dave down as to why he, so Dave, you don't want, murder to happen. Why is that? Well, because I prefer, because I believe in voluntary exchanges. Okay, why do you believe in voluntary exchanges? Sorry. Well, because I prefer it to aggression. So it's like, okay, so then your reasoning for why murder is wrong is just, I don't like it. So we're just on primacy of Dave's consciousness here. So, and that's the sort of problem you get when you don't have a proper foundation rooted in the non-aggression principle and the nature of scarcity. That's what you get. You end up with something like this.
Or aggression. And there are different types of libertarians who are libertarians for different reasons, some more radical than others, but that kind of is the centerpiece of what you're arguing for. If you're arguing for a libertarian society, you're arguing for more voluntary exchanges and less coercion.
Of course, just because you prefer it. Just because you prefer it. Because Dave is, of course, a pragmatist, and pragmatists think that the standard of the true is that which works, where works means that it achieves some human goal, some goal held by a consciousness. So the true is that which satisfies the purposes of a consciousness. So of course he takes this principle of the primacy of consciousness and it goes right into his ethics, right into his legal theory. And it's just, well, it is about what works. I prefer it, so that's what works. It's like, there's nothing to be done here. Dave has completely cut off his foundation, and if he was up against like somebody who was really competent with philosophy, he would be torn apart in the cross-examination on just this basis. He's like, what, a minute into his opening statement and he's already completely destroyed his case.
And if that's your starting point, and then your end point is supporting a policy that you would have to support in order to reject this resolution, that would essentially be saying you are going to drastically change almost every aspect of our society against the will of almost all of the people who live here.
So you can see again his like sort of central planner mindset here. He thinks that this open borders policy is you drastically changing an active thing. You are actively changing the society against the will of the people, right? This is a collectivist mindset. No, open borders is a null policy. I'm not actively getting in there. The government isn't actively getting in there and changing it. Now, of course, the government does do certain things which actively get in there and change it, but open borders wouldn't be one of them. Okay? Open borders is a null policy. It says the government shall not make any laws pertaining to immigration. And now, certainly, this will accentuate certain forced integration policies. That's bad. But the solution to forced integration isn't forced disintegration, because that's what immigration restriction is. Like, if we just take, let's take the premise that it's okay to have forced disintegration, immigration restrictions that is, to combat forced integration. Well, okay, so then that would justify the national border around the US, preventing foreigners from coming in. But hold on, what about all these Californians who want to move to Texas? Sorry. And the Texans don't like that. Okay, so then we're also going to have immigration restrictions between the states in the US. Okay, but what about these blue cities, these blue strongholds, and all the red rural areas? Maybe they don't want to intermingle. I mean, you're going to have forced integration there. Okay, so we're going to have borders between each individual city. And it's like, well, what if I'm a red-blooded Republican and my neighbors a Democrat, right? And we don't want to have forced integration. Okay, so then we're going to have borders between each building, and maybe even between like different domiciles within a building. And it's like, well, hold on, we're just sort of recreating the COVID lockdowns here, right? It's, you got to have a government permission to interact with somebody, because otherwise we're going to have forced integration and it'll just be terrible. This is like, if you accept this logic, I mean, he loves giving out all these like reductios ad absurdum against the open border stance, but it's like he hasn't actually considered the fact that you can do the exact same thing against him. He hasn't actually projected this out in his mind. I think if you were to bring this stuff up to him, he would just be completely stumped, right? There is nowhere to go from here. I don't think he can actually articulate these things particularly well at all. I mean, Hoppe does a much better job of it than Dave could ever hope to. Of course he does. Like, there are reasonable arguments to be had here, but Dave is just not hitting any of them.
I would humbly suggest you've messed up somewhere along the line. Like, if your kid brought you their homework and their starting point was everything should be voluntarily, every exchange should be voluntary, and their end point was, I am going to force on hundreds of millions of people their nation to be changed radically.
It's like, okay, so who specifically are you forcing it on? Right? Because the people who are hiring the immigrants, well, that's certainly a voluntary exchange. They certainly want the immigrants there. The people who are renting property and selling property to the immigrants, well, they certainly want the immigrants there. So what specifically are you saying? Because it's not the American people. Of course, if you just poll a bunch of people democratically, they're going to be protectionists pretty much 10 times out of 10. 10 times out of 10, you ask someone, should there be a minimum wage? And pretty much everyone's going to say yes, because it's a labor regulation, right? People love fucking labor regulations. So this doesn't establish anything, actually, right? What you'd need to show is, hey, this specific person is being aggressed against when this immigrant comes in. He isn't doing that. All of the actual legitimate exchanges which are going on are voluntary. Like, so even if we take Dave's standard of voluntary exchanges as the categorical imperative, like, how the hell are you going to get from there to we should stop voluntary exchanges when it's with brown people? Like, this is ludicrous.
In almost every area you could imagine, culturally, politically, religiously, all types of different areas. If that is your endpoint, I think it's worth re-examining how you got there. And I'm saying here that, again, if you look at where the American people are, there are kind of, it's hard to get a gauge exactly. Like, almost no pollster will ever ask, do you support open borders? Or close to, something where there's no restrictions except for violent or ill people, two fairly arbitrary, limitations. Almost no one will ask that question, but if you look at where the American people are on immigration, it's nowhere near there. And it's about as much of a consensus on any issue as you could find in America that people reject Alex's position on.
Yeah, so it's just, again, not an argument. We don't care about public opinion. We don't care about these things. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't play into law at all, right? Because you have to concern yourself with specific individuals who are being aggressed against, not the American people don't want this. Like, the American people want a whole lot of contradictory things. They want to have their cake and eat it too. All right, they want to have all of the goodies that they could possibly get from the government without being taxed a single penny. Like, that's what the American people want. So it's like, well, we got to follow the will of the American people, because that's going to most emulate how it would be ran privately. It's like, no, this is the American people are stupid, right? They don't know what they want.
Now, by the way, that is not that does not mean Alex is wrong.
There you go. Yeah.
I certainly hold lots of.
So it's like, why are you bringing this up?
Positions that the overwhelming majority of people would reject. I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity.
Okay, so he's not making an appeal to popularity, but he did bring up this point of, well, the American people don't want it. So let's see what he actually does. What's the relevance of this? What is this going to be used to prove?
I'm making an appeal to voluntarism. My argument is that if the people of a country do not wish to have a large number of immigrants coming in, then it is not a voluntary transaction.
Okay, so he's using the public opinion to prove that, well, it's not a voluntary transaction anymore because the people don't want it. He's appealing to popularity. So he is appealing to popularity and saying, I'm not making an appeal to popularity or an appeal to democracy here. That doesn't actually establish anything. Like, I don't want to make an argumentum ad hominem against Dave. I don't want to make an argumentum ad hominem against Dave right now. But he is wrong because he's a comedian rather than a philosopher. Right? But I said, I don't want to make an argumentum ad hominem, so therefore I must not have made an argumentum ad hominem. Like, this is lucrative. You can't just say that. You have to just not make the argument, Dave. Like, what does he think the flow is here? The flow is the American people, they decided collectively, they democratically voted on it, and they don't want immigrants. And this proves, therefore, that it's not voluntary to bring immigrants in. So we should restrict immigration because these people don't want it. That is an appeal to popularity, Dave. Like, it just is. What does he think the flow is there?
And to force that on them. And I think one of the things that libertarians, have a little bit of an issue with on this is that it certainly does seem as a reasonable starting point, and this is why I used to favor more of an open borders view, it seems as a reasonable starting point that we don't want the government doing anything to anyone. We don't want the government stopping somebody who's not aggressing or committing some type of violent crime. But the truth is that we find ourselves in an awkward position when it comes to immigration. Because immigration is a government policy. Whether you have...
I fucking hate this argument, and you only ever get this on the immigration point. You never get this argument anywhere else. Like, oh well, either way it's gonna be a government policy, so I guess we can't decide. Like, this is the problem with this sort of line of thinking is like, not all policies are actually the same thing conceptually speaking. It is an equivocation, right? Because, well, is the Second Amendment a policy? Is the Second Amendment just as much of a policy as saying that bump stock should be banned? Well, they're both policies, so I guess, but they're not actually the same type of thing. One of them is a null policy. I introduced that terminology last stream, where it's a policy which says, the government shall not make any policies in this area. That's not at all the same thing as something saying, here's a rule that the government is imposing. Those are, like, conceptually different, and the only reason they get equivocated like this is because of legal positivism. People think that all law just comes from the government, right? And, people like Dave, they just accept that wholeheartedly. So, with open borders, that's a null policy. It's saying the government shall not make any policy pertaining to immigration. That's the libertarian position, right? That isn't just the same category as something saying the government should make rules about immigration. They're completely different categories, and Dave's just packaging them together and saying, well, they're all just policies, so who knows?
Open borders or closed borders or anything in between, as long as the government is controlling those borders and the government is dictating immigration policy, what you have is a
right. So, but the open border stance is the government shouldn't control those borders. Right? And he's saying, as long as government controls the borders, as long as you have a policy, you have a policy, and he's just kind of dragging open borders along with this, but like, it doesn't actually apply.
Government program. And if you have a scenario where, let's say, 95% of the American people oppose an immigration system that would say anybody can come here as long as you're not sick or as long as you're not violent, you can come here. The overwhelming, it might be substantially higher than 95%, to be honest. We could get into the polls later, but there's been a lot of efforts, I think at times from the Cato Institute, to kind of spin the polls and say, support for higher immigration has gone up. A Cato, piece would read 10 years ago. And it's like, yeah, it's gone up to 17%. 17% support more immigration. What percentage actually supports what this type of policy would lead toward? Very, very few. So you have the overwhelming majority of the American people who do not support this policy. And as Brian
But again, he's not making any appeals to democracy or appeals to popularity. He's bringing this up as an aside. He just feels like it. He just feels like bringing this up. Like, clearly, Dave, you're trying to establish something with this point. What are you trying to establish? You're trying to establish that it's not voluntary by appealing to the popular opinion. What might we call that? An appeal to popularity.
Kaplan, who I also consider to be one of the most brilliant minds that libertarians have, as he has admitted himself, I don't know if he would consider it an admission, but from 1965 to today, higher levels of immigration have always been unpopular. Single-digit support for most of the years, higher levels of immigration. The American people have
Yeah, exactly. Anonymous Mike. The polls don't matter, but my position is popular, but the polls don't matter. Like, it's... pick a stand, pick a lane here, Dave. Like, either popularity matters, and it does matter what is most popular, or that doesn't matter, and we just have the principles. Right, so, and get into the fucking principles. He always tries this thing where he just walks one foot in both lanes at the same time. He does this with pretty much everything, right? Like, he'll go like, oh, well, I'm a pragmatist. You're too married to theory. You care too much about theory. But also, I've got a great theoretical argument for my point. It's like, pick a lane, Dave. Pick a lane.
Consistently, since 1965, said, we do not want this immigration policy. We want less people coming into the country, not more. Now, I will point this out, before I get into a little bit more of this argument, I will point out that, and I don't think I'm making a pedantic point here, I think this is actually very crucial to the debate. It is impossible to oppose this resolution unless you support unrestricted open borders.
Me.
Period. Like, zero restrictions. Because even if you're going to argue, as Alex has in the past, and many other of his Cato colleagues, for an Ellis Island-style system, you're still supporting an enormous restriction on peaceful...
Yeah, it's just a real shame that nobody's come and challenged Dave to debate, who doesn't agree with an Ellis Island type system, who does want unrestricted, totally open borders. It's a shame that nobody's sent Dave that challenge before. Who could the opponent possibly be there? I just don't know. It's like he's pointing to the exact problem with the people he like selectively chooses to debate. He's very selective with who he debates, and he only debates people who he thinks he can win against, right? Case in point, he says he's got this great zinger against Alex because Alex isn't actually like a total radical for open borders. Alex wants some restrictions. It's like, well, okay, then if you want some restrictions, then we can have any restrictions. It's like, well, gee whiz, then why doesn't he debate anybody who does want there to be no restrictions? Does he maybe just not have that zinger ready? Does he refuse to debate Zulu? Yes. I have challenged him multiple times, and he's refused, openly refused. So it's like, okay, well, and he doesn't even understand my argument, by the way. He's gone on streams where he's like, oh, and this Zulu guy, I'm gonna respond to his argument, and then he just rambles on and doesn't even articulate my point at all. Like, he just doesn't actually understand A, libertarian theory, B, my argument, C, philosophy. Like, he just doesn't understand anything.
And healthy people, because it's a prior restraint on their freedom of movement. So in other words, if the government were to say outside this venue, they were going to set up an Ellis Island-style checkpoint, okay? And you had to go through this checkpoint in order to continue traveling down the road. And this meant, let's make it real Ellis Island standards. You were going to get a health and psychological evaluation, including being forced to disrobe, having your eyelids checked. If you were older, you were going to be passed on for additional screening. You would be held for at least hours, in many cases days, in extreme cases months and even years, before you were granted the right to continue traveling. Me, Gene, Alex, and every single person in this room would consider this to be an egregious violation of our liberty.
Okay, but it's just fine if they're brown. It's fine if they're brown, though. It's fine. Who cares? They're brown, after all.
We would all say you're Joseph Stalin if you support that policy. And yet Alex and many of his colleagues will support that policy when it comes to immigration. It's almost like they're kind of admitting immigration is different.
And what is the difference? Will he actually articulate this difference, or will he just rely on his opponent already agreeing that immigration is something different? Or will he actually articulate what the difference is? Like, because this is the problem. Why he never debates people who are actually radicals for open borders. He never does that. Like, what? Because he didn't have these zingers against them. He can't just rely on them already accepting his already faulty premise. If he doesn't have anybody challenging that premise, then he's perfectly fine to go along. He can just truck along.
Different situation. And, once you support something like an Ellis Island style, system, it's the, the old bit where the man asks the woman, will you sleep with me for $10 million? And she says, okay. And he goes, will you sleep with me for $1? And she says, who do you think I am? And he says, we've already established who you are. Now we're just negotiating. Now, so often, many of the people who will argue for open borders or quasi-open borders will not bite the bullet and say there should be absolutely no restrictions.
I will. I'll bite the bullet. Of course, Dave, he's an expert in not biting bullets, so he'd know a whole lot about that. But I'll bite the bullet. It's like, hey, Dave, you know, if you want to learn how to bite bullets, I suggest you go over my catalog. You'll see just how you do it, just how you can do it tactfully, and you have to have the responses ready. You can't just bite bullets, Dave. You got to have the responses ready because they're gonna throw it back at you. You got to know the theory first, which is, you know, study up, I guess. But it's a whole lot more freeing when you can just bite bullets, Dave. I promise you.
But they argue as if they do believe that. Now, the fundamental point that I think libertarians need to understand here about whether our position should be open or closed or anything in between is that this all comes down to the issue of government property. Governments are the ones who control the borders. Now, there are some areas of the US border that are privately owned. And by the way, the people who privately own that land have been demanding that the government serve its only legitimate function and protect private property and protect them from trespassers, for which the government has not been doing its only legitimate job. But the point is that many libertarians will act as if it's a given that there ought to be no restrictions on government property.
Yeah.
But that simply isn't true. It's not
It is.
deduced from libertarian principles.
Okay. It's not deduced from libertarian principles. Let's deduce it from libertarian principles, shall we? Okay, so for any given piece of property, any possible scarce means you have, there are three possibilities. Either nobody owns it, in which case nobody can restrict you from it, including the government. Two, one guy owns it. Maybe it's like a case of eminent domain, right? And you know, obviously if it's a case of eminent domain where they just took some guy's house, then yeah, that guy should be allowed to exclude people from that house. Yeah, and also, yeah, only legitimate function. Like, yeah, okay, Dave. Are we trying to, like, appeal to the Randines or something? Or three, maybe a group of people own it. But hold on a minute. A group of people can't actually own a thing, because a group of people owning a thing implies a contradiction. A group of people, A through Z, they each commonly own a stick. A wants to use it to spearfish. B doesn't want this to happen. What should happen? Well, A owns it. Therefore, A should be allowed to use it. Therefore, the spearfishing should happen. Okay, great. But hold on. B owns it. Therefore, B should be allowed to use it. Therefore, the spearfishing should not happen. Ooh. That's a contradiction there. So, group property can't resolve disputes within the group. It implies contradiction. It's out. All right. So, then, what is this government property? Is Dave... And he would have to make the positive case here. Dave would have to show positively, hey, for this particular piece of government property, this particular guy is being aggressed against when you go there. It's like, okay, then you've shown the case. But there's a presumption of innocence here. There is not a presumption of, well, somebody must own it. Some particular guy must own it. But who? You have to show this. That's just a non-specific claim. It's completely arbitrary, right? I can just say, well, you must be murdering someone when you, like, go off to the bathroom. You must have murdered someone. So, well, who did I murder? I don't know, but you must have done someone. You know, people get murdered all the time, after all. So we got to assume that you're a murderer until we find the body. And it's like, well, no, this is an arbitrary claim. Because, again, presumption of innocence, it's not just some arbitrary thing that some judge came up with. Right? It's based on the more fundamental epistemic principle that the guy who asserts the positive claim has the burden of proof. Right? You have the burden to prove that for some particular piece of property, when you go there, you're aggressing against some particular guy. That's what you have to prove for everything in the United States. Nobody's ever done this, of course. Zero people have ever done this.
And none of us would apply that standard in life in general. You know, Alex shared...
So yeah, he says, like, well, it can't be derived from the libertarian principles, but I just did. So, what now? Will Alex be able to pick up on this? I doubt it. You know, as much as I think Alex makes a good case, he is not a theory head. He's not steeped in the philosophy of libertarianism, which is why Dave will debate him, but not me.
Recently, as this debate was coming up, he shared a meme, which I'm not holding him to the argument of the meme. I understand he can present his argument tonight. But I did think there was something interesting about this. He shared a meme, and it was like, on my side of the meme was like all the mental gymnastics you have to do to be a libertarian to support closed borders. And it's like, Manette taxpayers, or they're going to vote for Democrats, or a bunch of different steps. And on Alex's side, it was just one guy who said, government property is illegitimate. And it's like, okay. Now, I understand that's not exactly your argument. My point is just that many of the people who argue for this lax immigration policy, they act as if that's the pure libertarian position. But ask yourself, is that really the pure libertarian?
Sorry, you're going to try and establish that the pure libertarian position isn't that government property is illegitimate. So that the pure libertarian position would be that government property is legitimate. That's the flow here. Okay, Dave, let's see you try that.
Position? Is it the case that if the government is currently in control of some property, that therefore there ought to be zero restrictions? If that
Yes, unless it's owned by a particular person. Because the other alternative, if it's not owned by some particular person, then it's owned by nobody. Those are the two possibilities left, Dave.
were the case, then public schools could not tell a random 55-year-old drug addict that he can't enter the.
Yeah, so he's doing a very sneaky thing here with like this reduction, and he does it with all his reductions against open borders. Like, well, then some drug addict can come in and he can stink up the girl's bathroom, and it's like, okay, so, and he's using this as a reduction against there being no restrictions on government property. Keep that in mind, no restrictions. Okay, if there were no restrictions on government property, why would the homeless suddenly be able to mobilize and take control of everything, right? But why wouldn't some investment banker come along? Let's say the homeless did manage to take over some school. Okay, BlackRock comes along and says, hey, we'll buy this school from you for $1 million because we want to turn it into condos. The homeless guy goes, deal! He goes off and smokes some fentanyl or whatever, right? That's what no restrictions means. Dave isn't actually attacking that stance. He's trying to sneak a restriction through here. He's trying to sneak the restriction through that you're not allowed to homestead it. So there are still some restrictions. It's like, okay, then it's just irrelevant. It doesn't actually attack the point. So just drop it straight from the flow. Of course, Dave doesn't understand any of this. He doesn't understand what it even means to drop something from the fucking flow, right? Because he hasn't studied any of this stuff. But that's what they always do. All of these reductio cases, and I'm not even sure, does Dave even think this is a reductio case? Does he think it's a reductio ad absurdum or like an expected outcome of what would happen? It's like, sure, the reductio ad absurdum is all the bums who up till now have been so lazy that they need welfare to survive. The instant this no restrictions policy is implemented, suddenly they all mobilize. They're like sleeper agents or something. Then they just click into action and take over all the public property, and they say, now we're going to use this for stinking up. And that's what we want to do with it. And we won't accept any payment to get it from us. It's like, well, okay, that's logically possible, but like that's not at all the expected outcome. And if that did happen, then that must be the most value productive use of it, right? Because again, general law of economics. The instant you bring in market principles, the moment you bring in market forces to some property, it's going to start tending towards its most value productive route. The instant you do that, right? It's going to be tending towards its most value productive use. So, do we know that the most value productive use of a school is to educate children? No, we don't know that because we're not central planners. Do we know that the most value productive use of the local park is to be a local park? No, we don't know that because we're not central planners. We don't know any of this. So, yeah, let's go straight into the bust stage. We're just in an eternal boom with respect to government property. It's time to bring on the bust and start reallocating these means. And yeah, it'll be real hard in the initial stage. There's been a whole lot of malinvestment which has occurred, but the only way you deal with that malinvestment is to start reallocating these means. It might take 20 years, it might take 30 years, but when you come out the other side, it'll be way better. This is just Austrian business cycle theory. Like, should we just keep printing infinite more money forever because the bust will be bad? No, of course not.
School and hang out in the girls' bathroom. Why would you restrict someone's freedom of movement? Would you say that all government property, you should be able to scream obscenities in a public library, that you should be able to lay down and...
Again, maybe that's the best use for the public library, is as an obscenity screaming gallery. Or maybe it's better used as a movie theater. And some investor will come along and see this. We need entrepreneurs to deal with this, Dave.
Camp out in the middle of a freeway. Is it wrong? Is the libertarian position...
It's like on some level, Dave hasn't actually internalized the argument against central planning. He still, on some level, believes in central planning. He believes that like the public library should still be a public library. He thinks that's just like built into like some metaphysical teleology of the building. But it's like that's not the case at all. You need entrepreneurs to work this out.
That since a government has control of a highway, therefore they cannot institute a speed limit, that the speed limit ought to be whatever you can do. I don't think that actually follows. I think that if we recognize that taxation is theft, and we recognize that governments are built off aggression, they built and maintained public property with tax dollars that they took at the threat of violence from the American people. And what the American people want them to do with those tax dollars ought to play somewhat of a role. Now, I'm not arguing, as some other libertarians have, and I think they overstate the case a little bit, that public property is owned by the taxpayers.
Okay, so then what say should they have? Because he says they should have some sort of a say in it. What say? Because he's saying they don't own it. So he's agreeing that it's not group owned, it's not group property. But then what are our two remaining options? One guy owns it, nobody owns it. Those are our two remaining options. That's exhaustive, Dave. Like, so what say should they, this collective have over it? Or are we just abandoning property theory here?
Or owned by the net taxpayers. I'm simply arguing that the American people have a better claim than others do, which is really, I think...
Okay, better claim. That doesn't apply to a collective. You could say this particular American, who is part of the 1% has been taxed at like trillions of dollars or whatever, this particular American has a better claim to that particular thing than that random guy in Somalia. Okay, you can make a case for that, but it has to be a specific case. You have to specifically make the claim that this individual has a better claim than that individual to this particular property. Then that's a valid lens to use. Who has the better claim, right? But what it isn't valid to say is that this collective, the American people, have a better claim to whatever. So what specific thing? We don't know. It's just arbitrary on both sides.
The fundamental, what property rights kind of starts as. But the idea that if the American government is doing something, it ought to be for the American.
Yeah, Atrapanos, Atromhos. How does Dave know what the American people want? He polled them. he went to a pollster, and the pollster said, well, you know, my mystic divinations, they say the American people, they have this opinion, because that's just the majority opinion. It's appeal to popularity, appeal to democracy, yet again, right? Because there isn't actually this will of a people. There is no will of a collective. The collective doesn't actually exist. Like, again, so Dave's just like, implicitly, he just kind of agrees. He just kind of vibes with Platonism. And you need to have the Aristotelian approach here.
People, it ought to be in their interest. It's if there is a local public school and there's a group of people in the community who have been paying property taxes into this school for many, many years, I think that school ought to serve those people's interests.
Okay, so ought to serve those people's interests. Does he mean by that make it as value productive as possible? Well, then immediately let people homestead it. Let people homestead it, it'll be privatized, and then it'll be allocated to its most productive, value productive route, right? That's how you do that. Or, of course, there will be losers here. You know, somebody who's like the school principal or whatever. Or somebody's like a welfare queen who wants to just have their children educated for free. They're going to lose out. They won't be in their interests, meaning what they want to happen, I suppose. I mean, he's a pragmatist again. The truth is just whatever purposes you happen to hold, that's the standard of the truth. So they just happen to hold that they want to keep the school as a school. So that's the standard of truth and justice here. There's nowhere to go from here.
And not equally the interests of the world. Look, there's nowhere in libertarian principles where you can deduce that because I stole something from you, it is now unowned or owned equally.
Right. That thing that you stole is still owned by the person you stole it from. So, take the IRS example. The IRS steals $100 from me. I still own that $100. Yeah, I still own that $100. I don't own, like, the public park that they built 20 years ago. I don't own that. And Dave says I don't own that, because he says that the taxpayers don't own these things. So what point is he trying to establish here, even? Like, they don't own it, but also they have a better claim to something. That I took something from you doesn't mean you still don't own it. So I still do own it, but he doesn't think that I own the public goods. Like, so how is this different from, like, Asarchist's argument that they still own the tax money? They still own the tax money, not the things that they spent that money on. How is this different? Like, Dave surely agrees with that.
By everyone in the world. If taxation is theft, and everything that the government has built and maintained has been done so by robbing the American people, well then, the rightful owners are still the American people. Now, I'm not saying it's completely possible to divvy that up perfectly, but you know what's definitely possible? To not do what 95+% of the American people don't want, which is to open the border.
Yeah, I'll tell you what else 95+% of the American people don't want, is to have it so that anybody can own any weapon they want. I bet that 95+% of people are against the Second Amendment on some level. If you said, hey, should I be allowed to own a nuclear weapon? They'd be like, no, of course not. We need reasonable restrictions. Most people fundamentally disagree with the Second Amendment, especially if you're going to go into like a democratic stronghold. Like if I'm in the middle of downtown San Francisco, should I be prevented from importing a firearm to my house over public property? Because the people around there, they don't want it to happen. Like, we don't apply this standard anywhere else.
And I would just, I would say this, I'll try to leave on this, which is a thought experiment. I did not come up with this. It was the great Scott Horton, but I've been known for regurgitating his stuff in the past, and I'm not going to stop now. Imagine, if you will, I know this is an extreme to paint a picture, but imagine there's a little conflict right now between India and Pakistan. They both have nuclear weapons. Pakistan nukes India. Somehow India is able to get 500 million people who want to immigrate here. They all come. 500 million all come to America. Is it really the libertarian position? And let's say, hypothetically, 100% of the American people don't want them.
Okay, so 100% of the American people don't want them to come, and you've got 500 million people who want to come. Where would they go, Dave? Like, in the middle of the fucking desert, where nobody's ever been before? Because if 100% of the people did not want them there, well, nobody's going to rent to them, nobody's going to sell them a house, nobody's going to sell them any food, nobody's going to trade with them, because they don't want them there. If I didn't want someone in a country, if I desperately did not want somebody to move to Scotland, I sure as shit wouldn't sell them property in Scotland. Like, why would I do that? That implies that I do want them here in some level, right? I certainly want them here more than the alternative. Like, this is revealed in action, so they wouldn't come. So this is the thing with the open borders position, is that on open borders, there will be just as many immigrants admitted as the native population wants to admit. Certainly, there will be problems with, like, government housing and stuff, so there will be some level of forced integration, but again, the answer to forced integration isn't forced disintegration. It's not.
We don't want this to happen. Is the libertarian position really, sorry, you lose your country? There's nothing you're allowed to do. You will now culturally and racially and religiously, every tradition that you have is gone. You live in a completely different country now, and you know what? You have to take that. And even if very powerful people happen to be funding it because they like that for their agenda, if the libertarian position is that you have to take that, we have all messed up somewhere along the lines. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. You get an extra 22 seconds because Dave generously was allowed by you to have those extra 22, which were pretty crucial. Take it away, Alex.
Well, thank you to the Soho Forum, Gene, Nick at Reason, and Dave Smith for debating tonight. I will make 3 points in this debate. 1, libertarian first principles require the free movement of peaceful and healthy people. 2, evidence shows that immigration is beneficial to Americans. And 3, government immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to the United States. Dave is defending the resolution, quote, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America, unquote. That resolution is nonsensical from a libertarian position. Dave would see it clearly if he were asked to support resolutions with a one-word difference, like, quote, government restrictions on the private property, or drug use, or gun ownership of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. But he doesn't see it when it comes to immigration. Every strand of libertarian thought, from natural rights theory to ethical intuitionism and consequentialism, requires free movement, because immigration laws are government rules that attack our rights and restrict peaceful, voluntary exchange.
So, I mean, I get what he's doing here. He doesn't want to necessarily take on a specific school of libertarian thought. He wants to be kind of attack Dave on, like, just a broad libertarian grounds here. I get what he's doing. I disagree with it, though. I think it would be a lot more effective to have, hey, here is the correct theory of libertarianism. It is starting from the non-aggression principle. You can build up, get your property theory, get your theory of homesteading, get your contract theory, blah, 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 and on this theory, Dave is incoherent. Yasuka asks, if a person is on welfare, can they ask random taxpayers on the street to forgive them to redeem themselves? I mean, I don't know what it specifically would consist of. Redeeming yourself, probably just become a productive person, prove that you've changed. I mean, if you could prove that, like, hey, you're leeching off of me in particular, then you could have a claim there. But it would have to be a specific claim against a specific person. Your volume is a little bit too high compared to the debate. Let's just bump the debate up a little bit.
Government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people violates every strand of libertarian thought. Immigration laws are government regulations enforced by the state. We're not talking about trespassers on private property. We're talking about government laws and regulations that prevent you, all of you, from using your property as you see fit and from voluntarily interacting with others. Every immigration restriction infringes both on the rights of the immigrants and on your rights to associate with them. Libertarians care about first principles, but we also care about the consequences. We begin with a presumption of liberty, which can be overcome if immigration causes serious harm. Now, that's not the case here. Immigration consequences are overwhelmingly positive. Empirical economic research.
Yeah, I mean, this is... So, he's not adopting the presumption of innocence as like not only an ethical principle, but as a fundamental epistemic principle. He's not accepting these as universal principles. It's like, well, if the consequences were bad enough, then we get rid of the presumption of innocence. It's like, no, you're just opening the door for somebody else to come in and say, well, the consequences are really bad, because I value very highly that the culture doesn't change. That would be a really bad consequence. Because it's like, well, what counts as an ethically significant consequence then? You get into the weeds on that. It's like, are we just going to end up going down into like subjectivism here? Like, what are we going to... This doesn't actually establish the open borders point very strongly at all.
Shows that immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits, or at worst, break even. That includes costs like government schools, welfare, and criminal justice, which they all use less than native-born Americans. They are less likely to be arrested, convicted of...
But there is something to this. It specifically works against like this sort of, well, we can't abolish it whilst the welfare state exists. We can't abolish borders, that is, with the welfare state still existing. It's like, okay, well, I'll tell you a group of people in America who use a whole whack ton of welfare. Way more welfare than anyone else. They're called children, right? Children use a whole lot of welfare and they never pay a penny in taxes. So therefore, the libertarian stance is that the government should decide when you're allowed to give birth or not. That should be the libertarian solution until we get rid of the welfare state, of course. Because, of course, we can trust the government to do this right. And B, this is perfectly ethical, because otherwise we're going to have all these welfare leeches called children. It's like that they will potentially be a drain on welfare. That potential doesn't establish that you're allowed to A, restrict births, or B, restrict them from coming into the country. It doesn't establish that. That's like the correct attack here.
Crimes and incarcerated. Historically, more open immigration is associated with slower growth in the size of the federal government. At the state level, more immigration is either not related to changes in economic freedom or positively correlated. Benjamin Powell and I won an award for the best book in Austrian economics in 2022 for showing that immigration mostly increases economic freedom or has no effect. Immigrants are stopping socialism, they are not spreading it. Some immigrants use welfare in public schools. That's absolutely true.
Now, this is an interesting argument he's got here, which, I mean, I'm not much of a data guy, of course. I don't see myself necessarily getting too into the weeds on this type of argument. But it is an interesting argument, because it's always the assumption that, well, immigrants coming in, they're going to spread socialism. I think Alex, in some of his papers and stuff, fairly effectively shows, like, well, that's not clear at all. Like, if you have... Because, I mean, unions are a big source. I mean, he said this elsewhere, of course. I believe he might also say it here. unions are like a big source of big government. They're like a big driver of big government. But if you bring in if you have a bunch of immigrants in an area, there's less like in-group sort of protectionism going on. If I'm in an area where I've got like, Chinese, I've got like, this multi-ethnic sort of community, I'm less likely to support labor controls because it's less likely to favor my group, right? So I'm less likely to support unionization and whatnot. So you end up getting less growth from that, at least.
The libertarian response is to abolish the welfare state, not to expand government control over the borders. The problem is the government.
Codule Tad says this guy's full of crap. They do bring in more crime and statism. I mean, again, I'm not a data guy, so I don't know what it is. But I mean, I do think it is beside the point. So yeah, I mean, you'd have to go to Alex Nowrasteh if you wanted to argue about the data.
Services, not the.
But I do say, just from like a debate strategy viewpoint, it is maybe a good idea for Alex to really hammer in on the data, given that he doesn't really have the strong philosophical foundation. Because then maybe he can just beat Dave on like the higher up level. But Dave is attacking this from a more philosophical argument, which would supersede any data, really. So I think it would be way more effective if Alex did have that philosophical foundation and could say, hey, your philosophy's crap, you don't actually know what you're talking about. Because then Dave is completely undercut, and it would undercut any arguments about data. Right? So I think this is all kind of derivative. It would probably work better if Dave was more talking about the data. But I don't think Dave is doing that here.
Immigrants. Social Security's problem isn't the elderly, it's the government program itself. The problem with public schools isn't the children, it's the government schools. The problem with immigrant welfare use is the welfare state, not the immigrants. The far less extreme way to deal with this, rather than building a wall around the country, we should build a higher wall around the welfare state.
And yeah, that's a very good point. That's a perfectly valid point. It's like, hey, the problem is the initial government intervention. This is like, Mises says this, right? The initial intervention is the problem, not, you don't need more interventions to deal with that. That's just going to make things worse. So the initial intervention is having this redistributive welfare system. So just push for policies which would make it harder and harder and harder to get welfare, and you improve the problem drastically by just doing that.
Immigration restrictions are how tyranny will come to modern America. Dave has said in previous podcasts and other forums that he wants a full repeal of the progressive era. Now, I agree. The progressive era instituted immigration restrictions and passports to protect labor unions, promote nationalism, and adopt a U.S. government.
I like this sort of as a rhetorical flourish here. Where it's like, well, Dave, he wants a repeal of the progressive era. Like, yeah, absolutely. Complete repeal, he says. Which would include immigration restrictions, because immigration restrictions were implemented to help out unions, because it is a form of protectionism, fundamentally. Like, that's why people are so, Dave goes over that all these people support immigration restrictions. It's like, yeah, because they're protectionists, right? They support it for the same reason they support, like, any other labor regulation, right? They want to protect their jobs against competition.
Central plan of eugenics based on the science. America's borders were mostly closed to immigration from the late 1920s to the late 1960s. And what did we get during that time? What great libertarian wonders? The New Deal, labor law, government enforced monopolies, union subsidies, the peacetime draft, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Japanese internment, the CIA, entangling foreign alliances like NATO, the military-industrial complex, the Great Society, and civil rights laws that restricted freedom of association, infringed on our private property, and expanded the state to previously unimagined size. That anti-libertarian time in American history was made possible by immigration restrictions and the practically closed borders that they instituted. Don't believe me? Well, listen to what Paul Krugman said. Quote, "The New Deal made America a vastly better place." I'm quoting him, by the way. Yet it probably wouldn't have been possible without immigration restrictions. Absent those restrictions, there would have been many claims, justified or not, about people flocking to America to take advantage of welfare programs, unquote. The Great Society was passed when the immigrant share of the U.S. population was the lowest in American history, including the colonial period. And that low point was caused by immigration restrictions on the movement of peaceful and healthy people. The Immigration Act of 1965 slightly, just slightly, liberalized immigration. And what happened after then? Union subsidies fell. Labor law was liberalized. You're noticing a pattern here.
So I believe the sort of attack Dave will give to this line of argument is, well, it's post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? It's like, well, these immigration restrictions came in, and then after this thing happened. These immigration restrictions were lightened, and then after this thing happened. So Alex is going to have to try real hard to show some sort of causality here, that it is actually caused by the immigration restrictions.
We don't like unions. The number of government monopolies fell. Growth in the size of government actually slowed. Taxes were cut. Trade was liberalized, and the draft was abolished. Those liberalizations did not happen when the borders were closed. They only happened after they were slightly, barely reopened. Immigration restrictions are the health of the state and a declaration of war on our freedoms. They are also some of the most economically devastating, complex, and Soviet-style laws in the United States. You may have noticed there's a piece of paper on your chairs, a very highly simplified map of the legal immigration system. And it is simplified, and it's only part of it. But the point to understand about immigration law is it is the exact opposite of every other portion of American law and our Anglo-Saxon system of jurisprudence. Every other portion of law, it says specifically what is not allowed. But everything else is fine. There's no law that says Dave and I can shake hands, right? But there's a law that says he can't punch me in the face. Okay, that makes sense. Immigration law is the opposite. It says all immigration is illegal except what the government specifically allows.
Yeah, I think this is a good line of attack here. It's like, well, this is an anathema to both like the standard US law, the standard Anglo legal system, and also just natural law. Because natural law, it doesn't say that, well, you need this specific government permission to do X, Y, Z. It says, well, this thing is illicit. This thing, it's negative versus positive, right? So I think this is a good line of attack, and I don't necessarily know what Dave can do with this line of attack. It's like, yeah, well, it should be different because it's, for reasons, immigration is different to giving birth or any of the other analogous scenarios, right? It's different, and it's like, I really want to see Alex like hone in, hammer this home, like what specifically makes it different? Because you can't just say, well, it's different. It's like, different how?
If you fit into a narrow Soviet-style category, then maybe if you apply and wait 20, 30, 50 years, yeah, you can get in. Otherwise, there is no way for you to come in. It is the opposite of our legal traditions. To support government immigration restrictions and mass deportations means that you must also support the methods of actually enforcing those laws. These enforcement methods are some of the most anti-libertarian laws in existence. Examples.
That's also a good point to bring up because, Dave, he wants to kind of have all of these government restrictions on immigration. He wants to use the entire US military to enforce martial law on the border to stop immigration. It's like, okay, well, the border is 100 miles from each border, actually. That's the border's enforcement zone. He wants the entire US military to be just roving around in there. That's his policy position. He wants this, and he's doubled down on this. This is what he wants. It's like, okay, goodbye capitalism. You're gone now. And it's like, it's draconian.
Trump designated drug cartels as terrorists and is considering designating some gang members arrested inside of the U.S. as enemy combatants. Yeah,
designating drug cartels as terrorists. Dave's response to that is, well, put the entire U.S. military on the border with Mexico. Yeah, okay, that couldn't possibly be a prelude to an invasion. It's like, come on, man, this is not difficult stuff.
To stop immigration. Trump wanted to send U.S. troops to Mexico to fight a war against terrorist cartels. He deployed the military to the border. He used the Alien Enemies Act to deport migrants to prison camps in El Salvador without due process. The Alien Enemies Act allows federal officers, ICE agents, to enter houses without...
And the crazy thing about all of these things he's going over, with how horrific Trump is being, how tyrannical he's being with respect to immigration, is Dave actually wants a more tyrannical policy than this. Dave wants it... Dave doesn't think Trump went far enough with respect to immigration. He wants the entire US military to be involved in this type of operation. It's like, Jesus. Like, how do you look at what Trump's doing with immigration and think, he didn't go far enough? It's like, what the heck? So all of these things that Alex is mentioning here, I want you to keep in mind, Dave wants them to go further than that.
Without a warrant to arrest migrants the president designates as terrorists or invaders. Most federal law enforcement officers actually work to enforce immigration laws. Every time you travel, you must show your papers. Every time you get a job, you must fill out the I-9 form to prove to the government that you are complying with immigration laws. Many states and the federal government require employers to check your papers against federal databases through the E-Verify system when you apply for a job. And, mark my words, E-Verify will be used for gun checks. It's just a matter of time. Every significant proposal for a national biometric identity card is designed to enforce immigration laws. There are vaccine mandates for immigrants. The government is deporting green card holders, like Mahmoud Khalil, arrested without a warrant, by the way. The government lied about that, of course, because he expressed an opinion that contradicts American foreign policy toward Israel. Foreign students, like Rumeysa Ozturk, are being deported for writing op-eds critical of Israel. A French scientist was denied entry for a scientific conference because he had phone messages critical of President Trump. America has a secret gulag for immigration offenders. A German green card holder named Fabian Schmidt lives in New Hampshire. He was arrested, held incommunicado, and literally tortured by ICE. He ended up in the hospital. They tried to make him sign a paper to give up his green card. Irish green card holder Cleona Ward, arrested and held for 17 days after returning for the US. And you know what she did? They found that she had a 20-year-old marijuana charge in a state that had recently legalized marijuana. An Australian on a work permit returned from a funeral in his home country was arrested by customs and deported for no good reason, separated from his job, his apartment, his property, and his spouse. 2 other German tourists, a Canadian with a visa, and several Brits were disappeared for weeks in immigration detention and not allowed to contact lawyers. Other German tourists were strip searched, detained.
Again, like, this is the type of thing which you have to keep in mind when you're advocating a policy. Like, the government needs to get a step in here and deal with this. The government needs to use the entire US military to deal with this. This is the thing you're gonna get. It's like Dave, you know, he accuses people of being utopians all the time. They're just living in an Afghanistan in their head. But it's like, how utopian do you have to be to think that the government's gonna use the entire US military to enforce this type of thing, and it won't be an utter disaster? Like, with tanks rolling down the fucking street and everything.
Deported after arriving legally because Trump's customs agents didn't think their travel schedules were detailed enough. A Russian scientist at Harvard named Ksenia Petrova was detained by ICE for 8 weeks for the heinous crime of failing to deport frog embryos as part of her research on a flight from France. Trump shipped migrants, 40% of whom have no criminal convictions or charges against them, to America's prison camp in Guantanamo Bay. Trump activated the Wartime Enemy Aliens Act to deport non-criminal migrants, 20% of whom weren't even illegal immigrants.
Yep, okay, I'll put it further.
With limited or no due process to El Salvador's prisons and bribe the government there with your tax dollars to take them in. One man was deported illegally, and when a judge ruled he had to be returned, Trump's administration said, sorry, we can't do anything about it. Trump's administration lawyers wrote in a March 14th memo that the Alien Entities Act allows ICE agents to enter private property without a warrant. The government is using eminent domain to take private property from people along the border to build a wall. Libertarians who support mass deportations are not defending.
Yeah, and you know, Dave, he likes to ho-hum over. It's like, well, these people on the border, they want the government to do their one legitimate function, which is defending the private property. And it's like, well, okay, but your policy, it requires eminent domain to build a wall across the border. It's like, you know, you can't have it both ways.
Private property rights. They are really defending the power of the government to violate your private property. ICE arrested a native-born American citizen by pulling him off the street in Chicago into an unmarked van and held him overnight until they checked his wallet to discover he was a citizen. Native-born American Jose Hermosillo was arrested in Arizona and held in immigration detention for 10 days incommunicado because he wasn't carrying his papers. Immigration enforcers go to schools, churches, courthouses to arrest peaceful people, operate with near impunity in a 100-mile buffer zone along America's borders where they run internal checkpoints, harass Americans and immigrants, and frequently enter private property without permission. ICE agents make arrests without warrants and then just create them for themselves in the field after the arrests. ICE recently bragged that part of its job is keeping out, quote, ideas that cross our borders illegally, unquote. Show your papers to travel near the border. Carry your papers or you'll be in ICE detention for weeks. Show your papers to get a job, all for immigration enforcement. The U.S. is becoming a your papers please society to enforce immigration laws are the type that Dave is defending tonight. Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, said the administration was considering suspending the writ of habeas corpus because we're being invaded by illegal immigrants. Finally, Trump and his press secretary have said that they are considering deporting American citizens to prison camps in El Salvador. You heard me right. They are considering deporting American citizens to prison camps in El Salvador. The last person to try to exercise this much power here was named George III. If tyranny comes to the United States, it will come to enforce immigration laws. Immigration laws can only be enforced by the heavy hand of the federal government. Do you really think all that is consistent with libertarianism? Dave endorsed mass deportations even over a month ago. Mass deportations require taking money from taxpayers at force.
I will say that, you know, I mean, he's got a lot of good stuff in here. but he will have to go into some of the theoretic arguments that Dave brought forth and show why they're wrong, like at some point, because ultimately none of it would matter if Dave's theoretical argument stood, because then it's just, well, then immigration restrictions do make sense. Yeah, no, you need to attack the theoretical argument at some point here.
And hiring unionized federal law enforcement officers to arrest people, rip them away from their families and property. In Trump's America, mass deportations require paying foreign autocrats taxpayer dollars to incarcerate non-criminals. Would Murray Rothbard or Ludwig von Mises support that? We got the populist immigration enforcement regime that Dave wants, and it's leading the United States down a dark road. Hearing people defend these immigration restrictions and the enforcement system that supports them makes people sound like they're defending COVID regime in May of 2020 or the Iraq War in 2006. Give it up. Immigration restrictions must be statist, and they can be populist. They can be conservative, progressive, nationalistic, socialistic, or autocratic, but they cannot be libertarian. Ron Paul recently said, quote, President Trump announced earlier in his second term that foreign students who engage in illegal activity would be deported. Most people agreed with this. But then his DHS began showing up with masks in plain clothes and arresting people. It's a slippery slope that will backfire on those who support it, unquote. Shortly after Ron Paul said that, Dave Smith said, I support mass deportations. Ron Paul is correct, Dave is wrong. They may want mass deportations without the atrocities, but communists say they want equality without the starvation and death camps too. In both cases, the trade-off is our liberty. Immigration restrictions break a lot of eggs. For a libertarian to support those violations of rights, the government's mass deportation regime had better be cooking up a pretty tasty libertarian omelet. Dave has not made any argument that these rights violations and increased state power will do so. Even if you don't care about immigrants, whatever they do to immigrants, they're going to do to you eventually. The worst infringement on the liberties of Americans in our lifetime was the COVID lockdowns. Horrible tyranny, unspeakable and unimaginable that we lived through that in this country. Immigration restrictions, I just have a few more seconds, of the kind Dave defends are like a permanent global COVID lockdown, complete with a vaccine passport. Mass deportations and immigration restrictions require a domestic police state like the one we're seeing growing up around us. He desires a government deporting people who broke immigration restrictions, so he desires a tax-funded internal security state to do so. Dave can defend statist mass deportations if he wishes. He can defend permanent global COVID-style immigration lockdowns on peaceful and healthy people if he wants, but he cannot do so while claiming to represent libertarianism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed. I will say, again, I would like to get him to get more into, they're going into the cross-examination now. We really need Alex to get into the theoretical arguments that Dave was bringing up. Show, like, hey, this is actually nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't have high hopes for that, necessarily. But there were a lot of good points in there, at least. I will just have a brief intermission, just to go to the loo. So if anybody wants to do that, now would be the time. All right. So, cross-examination. Let's see how Dave does here.
5 minutes. Prime Minister rebuttal from Dave. Take it away, Dave.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, listen, I'll be honest. I'm a little bit surprised with Alex's opening. I think if the resolution tonight was Trump's doing a great job with his immigration enforcement, that would have been a very powerful opening. I think if the resolution was, should libertarians support mass deportations?
Right, because this is the thing, is Dave brought forth some theoretic points, so it wouldn't even necessarily matter. Because Dave hasn't, in this debate, entered into the flow his immigration policy. Alex would need to get out of him, what is your immigration policy? And then, well, that's tyrannical. It does, there is something which it does achieve. It does achieve, like, hey, well, this is generally a very tyrannical thing. So you have a high burden to meet here, Dave. But Dave could then argue, well, I did meet that high burden with the theoretic arguments. So then you need to attack the theoretic argument, show, well, no, this actually doesn't work at all. So yeah, that's what I assume Dave is going to go into here. I haven't watched this bit in a while. Actually, I watched it like a while ago when I was notating this originally. I did watch Dave's opening statement last night, though.
He would have at least started to make the argument there, but really just nothing is touching the resolution that we're actually here to argue, which is, the question really is, do we have to embrace an immigration?
Yeah, and this is also, because Dave has a very low bar to meet. He just has to have, okay, well, some immigration restriction. If Dave proves that at least one little bit of an immigration restriction makes sense from a libertarian position, if he's able to establish that, then the resolution goes in his favor. It doesn't even matter if Dave obviously wants way more than that. That doesn't even matter for the debate. So Alex really needs to bite the bullet and take like, no, zero immigration restrictions are justified. And then you properly attack Dave's stance.
Immigration system that would undoubtedly result in an orders of magnitude increase in the number of immigrants coming into this country against the wishes of almost all of the American people. That's really the question, and nothing that he said really touches my argument, so I'll be interested to see his rebuttal. I guess there's a few things that I should respond to. Number one, I will say, I think this is a bit goofy, the direction Alex went in terms of saying that, like,
I kind of fucking hate this argument. Dave uses it all the goddamn time. He's like, well, this is kind of goofy. I just think this is kind of goofy. It's like, well, that's not a fucking argument. Jesus Christ. I just find this goofy. It comes straight from the fucking pragmatism again. The true is that which works. So if Dave just finds something goofy, then that counts. That counts as an argument. Because he finds it goofy, it's not going to satisfy him. It's not going to satisfy the purposes of his consciousness, and we're in primacy of Dave's consciousness now. So therefore it's false. It's like, okay.
Like when immigration, the periods of large immigration, the government was being reduced, and during periods of slow immigration, therefore that's responsible for the things that followed. The truth is that the way, I'm pretty sure, because I've listened to some of his presentations on this topic, the way Alex is calculating whether the size of government grew or shrank is by government spending as a percentage of GDP.
And now, Alex did dispute this. I believe he had like a podcast with Bob Murphy on this. So, I mean, yeah, it's data. It doesn't really matter much.
Which no libertarian should ever use as a metric for how you rate how big or small the government is. It's on the level of like, if I made $100,000 a year and I have one gun, that's my home security, is my gun. And then the next year I got a big raise and now I make $1 million a year. So I got 5 more guns. And then a friend of mine would go, hey, you sure got a lot more guns. And I'd go, actually, I have less guns as a percentage of GDP. But the point is you have more guns, right? So if you want to look at since 1965 and the immigration reforms, the size and scope of government has enormously grown. And I don't know if you've been looking around and haven't noticed it, but we haven't had a smaller government as we've been having more immigrants come into the country. In addition to that, I think that listen, if we have time to get into some of this, I'm happy to. I'm very skeptical about a lot of the claims that Alex makes, and we could get into the studies, I've read through them, in terms of immigrants committing less crime, or immigrants contributing more than they take out of welfare programs.
And you see, this is the kind of problem with going into just a pure data consequentialist type of argument, is then Dave can just throw it back and be like, well, you know, I disagree with that data, and I disagree with how you weigh the consequences and blah, 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 blah. And like, you know, it doesn't actually get into the heart of the issue here. Dave, for his faults, has recognized that, like, well, the heart of the issue is the libertarian theory. I think he's drastically wrong about the theory, but he is at least getting into the libertarian theory. Biblical Anarchy podcast for $5. Thank you very much. Alex loses the debate because he doesn't clearly bite the bullet to say there should be zero limits on immigration, which the resolution demands. Yeah, absolutely. So on a technical level, Dave's able to just flow through with, well, hey, I can establish just this one little immigration restriction as justified, and then the resolution is one for Dave. So, I think Alex doesn't really understand what it is he has to be arguing for here. Alex has to be arguing that they're literally, Dave pointed this out in his opening statement. Alex has to argue that there should be zero immigration restrictions. So if Alex doesn't believe that, then he should never have accepted this resolution. Because, all Dave needs is just that one little thing. Even if Dave establishes an Ellis Island system is better than no Ellis Island system, then he wins the debate.
This is actually kind of misleading to make those claims, and I think if you actually look at the data, it might be the case, but is not really conclusive, actually. But I just want to be very clear. All of that is completely beside the point. That has nothing to do with how libertarians ought to feel about this. The only question that really matters is, do the American people have more of a claim over America than the rest of the world does?
Right, and you have to attack that by saying, well, that's a collectivist argument. You have to attack that saying the American people don't have claims over anything. They don't have wills. They don't have any of this sort of stuff. They can't own property. Individuals can, but not the American people, the collective. That's the way you have to attack this. You have to attack it on philosophical grounds. You can have all the data in the world about the consequences, but it doesn't really matter for Dave's theoretical argument. You can just kind of sail right past that and ignore it, but really.
Because if that's true, then the question is this a voluntary transaction? So in other words, I do stand-up comedy. I tour on the road all the time. I go out about 2 weekends a month. Now, believe me, if it was up to my agent, I would be out every single day. He would have me at some strip mall every single weekend. I would work nonstop because he'll make more money if I do that. And the truth is, I'll make more money if I do that. But I got 2 little kids and a wife, and I kind of like spending time with them, so I limit the... Now, if someone came and put a gun to my head and said, you got to get out on the road every single day, I would make more money. That would be better for my GDP. But it's not libertarian. The question is it a voluntary transaction or not? And in terms of whether even if immigrants do commit less crime, which again, this is all based on the Texas homicide numbers, it's not very clear that this is the case. But if it's true that immigrants commit less crime, that still does not matter. Listen, Ann Coulter, who is not right about everything, but I did really like this example, she's the one who said, and I think she's right about this in her framework more than Alex is, saying that immigrants commit fewer crime is kind of like if you had some food in your refrigerator and 50% of it was rotten. And then you went to the supermarket and you said, the food I got at the supermarket is only 20% rotten. Isn't that great? You'd be like, no. Because the expectation is the food that you're voluntarily bringing in is supposed to be 0% rotten. You're just bringing more rotten food in here. Even if illegal immigrants commit crime at a lower rate, that's still just more crime that we're inheriting. We already have to deal with the problems we have here. So the question...
So I'm not sure necessarily what this establishes from a debate perspective. I mean, if he wants to respond to it, he can. That's obviously his prerogative. It does sort of drop it off the flow. It means that Alex can't use it to necessarily establish anything further until he proves that immigrants commit less crime. But I don't think that immigrants committing less crime does actually establish anything.
The relevant question for libertarians is not what leads to economic growth or who has a higher or lower crime rate. The question is quite simple. Do the American people, we take in more immigrants than any other country in the world, legally. Do we have a right to cap it at any number? Or is it the case that it is incumbent on us, if we believe in liberty, to say you must take in the world if the world wants to come? Thank you.
If you support immigration restrictions, then you have to support the methods of actually enforcing those laws. You can't run away from that. If somebody was up here arguing that they want drug prohibition, but they don't really want the police to beat up anybody or arrest anybody, you wouldn't take it seriously, would you? Well,
yeah, that's fair, because, there is this eat your cake and have it too type argument, where it's like, well, to prove that immigration restrictions are fine, you need some particular immigration restriction that you're advocating, and you'd have to endorse the method of actually doing that restriction. I don't think he really needs to dig down into the theory, though, and attack the theoretic point, or else Dave can just show, well, they say Ellis Island system, you agree with me, so ipso facto, I win, right? Now Alex has put himself in a very weak position here. Mon Hops for $8 Thank you very much. Disappointed not to be invited to abuse Dave Smith more. All jokes aside, looking forward to going back and watching. Yes, indeed. If you have any more ideas of things to go over in future, bring them to me, and we can do more streams together. But yeah, no, I was just watching this last night, and I was like, for fuck's sake, this is terrible. I need to talk about this ASAP. Um, yeah, I mean, I am wanting to do. I said this right at the beginning, but more people are here now. I am wanting to do, aiming to stream at least once per week. I will be debating Mr. Biblical Anarchy podcast on Friday, I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. On David Friedman and his theory of rights. I'll say. But yeah, so I need to do at least one of these a week. These daytime streams seem to be fairly copacetic. Try and get streams at different times so that as many people as possible can watch them. And these like response type videos are very easy for me to put together. I can just find something that I want to talk about and then, talk about it, riff on it.
I don't take it seriously right now when Dave says he wants immigration restrictions, but not all that little mean stuff that the government does. He doesn't like the mean stuff that the government does, but you can't pick and choose like that. That's one of the reasons why we are libertarians, is because we recognize that government is a blunt instrument, and that is all it is. Now, when he talks about the rights of Americans, or the rights of Americans to choose who comes here, what he's really talking about is the power of the government. You have rights. The government does not have rights to make decisions for you. You have rights. If you want to hire somebody from overseas, if you want to
Yeah, so this would be a perfect way to get into the theoretic argument. You have rights to do these things, and it's specifically individuals have these rights. A collective does not have these rights, so Dave's argument about a collective not wanting the immigration doesn't follow. It's individuals. If an individual wants an immigrant to come over and visit them, then that individual is allowed to do it. If an individual wants to hire an immigrant to work for them, then they're allowed to do it. And an individual is allowed to sell them property, and blah, 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 blah. But he really needs to hammer in that Dave's argument doesn't work because it's collectivist. That's what he needs to do here.
marry them, you should not have to ask the government permission to do so. It is incumbent upon the government to prove that that person is a menace, or will come here and commit crimes, or will spread this virulent disease.
Well, I suppose the resolution does exclude people who are diseased and people who commit crimes. So yeah, no, I think this works specifically for this resolution. Yeah, that's fine. It's fine. Monhop, we should do a review of his debate with Sarwark. Yeah, that one could work. We'll be a lot friendlier to Dave in that debate because this was before he decided to be a big old pragmatist. But yes, thank you for the $3 Australian.
Or something like that. That is the way that we should frame these things. Not that you have to prove to the government, oh, please, can you please, let this guy in and make sure it satisfies with your central plan. No, there's no other area where we would be having this discussion when it comes to public policy. Not a single one. Immigration is the only one when it comes here. I'm also struck by Dave's consistent appeal to public opinion. We're talking about what libertarians should support. I want to remind you, the resolution of the debate is, quote, government restrictions on the immigration of peaceful and healthy people make sense from a libertarian standpoint, especially in present-day America. It's not, well, does the median voter in the United States want to increase immigration? That's not the resolution. Who cares? We're not debating that. We're debating what libertarians should.
Yeah, so, but specifically, he needs to do an extra step here. The median voter doesn't matter. But Dave is using the median voter here to prove that it's therefore involuntary. So you need to say that this step doesn't work, that you can't prove that something's involuntary against a collective will, because there is no such thing as a collective will. So there's an extra step Alex needs to take here. And actually, I just realized something. Let's see. Let me give this a go. A source. Browser source. My chat widget wasn't working. Maybe this one will. Don't know who that is. Oh, that's very tiny. The tiniest fucking. All right. Nope. Oh well. Maybe that's a little bit better. I'll tweak it properly off stream, I guess. But yes. So yes, Alex needs to take this point about popularity and say, hey, and this doesn't therefore show the voluntary bit. So let's see if he gets that second part in.
Think about this. What's the proper mode and model for libertarians to think about this very crucial issue? Now, when he makes an analogy between government property and saying, well, they should behave like they're private property owners so that they can channel somehow magically the will of the median voter, as if the median voter matters for these types of things in order to manage property, that proves too much. The median voter, and the way that they manage their property, wants all types of crazy non-libertarian things. All types of things. Most people don't have guns in their house and don't want them. Does that mean that I can't carry my gun on the street because a median voter doesn't want that? I can't carry a gun concealed in my pocket? No libertarian would accept that response. None. But for some reason, we're supposed to accept it when it comes to an immigrant coming to the United States, who, by the way, they come here because people here want to interact with them. They want to hire them voluntarily. They want to sell stuff to them. They want to buy from them. If nobody in the United States wants anything to do with immigration, who's going to sell them a ticket to come here? Who's going to rent them an apartment? Who's going to give them a job and pay them?
Yeah, indeed. So he is going for this argument of like, well, if truly nobody wanted it, then it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't matter if it was open or closed borders or anything.
Voluntarily. Nobody. This is why we like capitalism. This is why libertarians like these things, because it's voluntary. If nobody wants to buy goods and services from the immigrants, then they will not come. Period. We talk about maybe hundreds of millions, billions of people coming here from around the world. Give me a break. 330 million people could move to New York tomorrow. Well, where are they? You know, if we take that logic to its extreme. We cannot look at the way that the state manages its property and reason to popularity. The real popularity is how Americans vote with their feet. It's how they vote with their dollars. And what do? They buy goods and services provided by immigrants. They hire them, they marry them, they move to cities where immigrants are disproportionately. They're not moving to West Virginia, folks. They're moving to places where there are more.
Yeah, so again, this is helping to establish the point, like, well, I mean, if people really don't want immigrants, then why the hell do they keep interacting with immigrants? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Immigrants and there's more prosperity. The immigrants came here voluntarily. So what I want to say is, you know, there are absolutely concerns about these things. Oh, and by the way that we measure government growth over time and the size of the government, we have lots of different analyses in our books, the percentage of GDP, government spending as a percentage of GDP. We look at the economic freedom scores that have been calculated by organizations like Fraser and Cato. We look at others.
Metanali. Sorry about that. $50 US. Thank you very much. Do you think it is possible to establish an anarchist society in completely uncontested by the state lands? So like lands to the virgin wilderness, like Antarctica or oceans. Yeah, possibly. If no state is interested in it, then yeah, they probably aren't going to care too much. But there's normally a good reason why no state is interested in it, is because nobody's really interested in living there, so there isn't a tax base to make money off of. I think the more reasonable approach to this type of thing is to consider, well, how does a state actually come about? It comes about because people want there to be a state. People want there to be a state because they have a philosophy which says that the state is a good thing. So that's really where you have to be attacking it. You have to attack it on the front of, is the state actually a good thing? On the philosophical grounds, that is. So doing Isaiah's job, preaching the rational, this worldly philosophy, just makes it impossible for there to be any state, because fundamentally the state is a tiny portion of people. They can't like overpower everybody else. They can only survive insofar as people want there to be a state. So that's the area you have to attack it from. Rather than, I mean, you know, maybe by the time we get to like space exploration, there can just be an infinite frontier. So, you know, anarchist groups would be able to like collect together and go, hey, we're going to piss off to Alpha Centauri. And then, like, you know, you'd have a proper philosophically minded group of people getting away from the state, forming like their Galt's Gulch up in the stars.
economic freedom scores calculated by Heritage. We look at the state level scores that are done by Jason Sorens and other people. So we have numerous different ways to take a look at the size of government. It's not just that. But what I want to just say is if this were any other topic of public policy, if this were drugs, if this were private property issues, if this were the ownership of guns, if this were anything else, the answer to this from a libertarian perspective would be super obvious. Every argument that Dave has made against immigration is also an argument against people having children. They don't assimilate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really a really good analogy to make. But of course, Alex isn't going to take it all the way and bite the bullet and say like, well, we wouldn't accept any restrictions on having children, so therefore we shouldn't accept any restrictions on immigration. He should really take that analogy to its logical conclusions, and then he can win this resolution.
They're not next taxpayers, and man, they're going to mess up our culture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Slope is dope. Do you all support open borders for Israel? I mean, yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Before we move to the Q&A portion of the evening, that will involve 3 different kinds of Q&A. The audience will get a chance to ask questions. That will come a bit later. Each of the debaters will get a chance to ask each other a question. I'm going to exercise moderator's prerogative just initially to toss a couple of questions at our debaters. First, again, a point of clarification that I want to make clear. I am aware of the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom Index, and only one of the criteria is government share of GDP.
And this is sort of one of the problems with, trying to go into the data argument without really deeply understanding the data. Like, I think Alex is, if you try and attack Alex on the data front, he's just going to be able to, he wrote the fucking papers. He's going to be able to run circles around you. So I think it was a strategic mistake of Dave to try and sort of wager on what the data showed. He should have just really stuck to like, hey, well, I've got this philosophical argument for it. And that just transcends any sort of data point you might bring up. Dave should have just hit that stronger. And then, of course, Alex should have said, well, your theory sucks. But I don't think Alex necessarily understands what the specific philosophical problems with Dave's stance is.
The other criteria have to do with rule of law, for example, with measurement of regulation, with other aspects that are non-budgetary about economic freedom. Do I understand you correctly to say, Alex, that you took those into account and that Dave is making a factual mistake in thinking that you only took government as a share of GDP? Is that correct?
That's correct. We looked at all these different measurements separately and numerous different analyses, including the book that I mentioned with Benjamin Powell and lots of other papers. We also looked at public opinion. We looked at numerous on public policy issues. So we looked at all of these different measures, yes.
Any comment from you, Dave?
Well, I didn't say that was the only measure. I said I've seen Alex use this measure before. But so are you telling me that the government we have today is substantially smaller than the government in 1960?
No, my claim was that it has grown a lot more slowly since then. So the period of time when it grew the fastest was from about 1930 to the late 60s, and then it slowed down. And my theory for why immigration causes that is that immigration kills labor unions, and labor unions are the most successful progressive organization that lobbies and pushes for big government.
Yeah, that's a good theory, but he didn't really flesh it out necessarily that much in this debate. I would like to see him flesh that out a little bit more.
Dave, I just want to challenge you then. I'm familiar with the Economic Freedom Index of the Fraser Institute, Cato, and it was increasing from 1970 to 2000. It's still at highs. So if he did use a broad-based Economic Freedom Index, and if it does tend to correlate over the last 50 years with the increase in immigration, would you agree then that there is some connection, that it's not just government? Would you agree with that, or do you still challenge it?
Agree that there's a connection what? Between immigration and
Yeah, Monop. Forget the median voter's view on other policies. Alex should just ask Dave what their view is on whether the government should exist. Yeah, so it's like, well, 100% pretty much of the Americans want there to be a government. So I mean, it's definitely possible to keep the government going. It's definitely possible to do what 100% of them want. It's like, that doesn't actually establish anything. And of course, the second step of that is to say, well, this appeal, it still is an appeal to popularity, and it doesn't establish that it's no longer a voluntary exchange. Slope is dope slowed down, maybe 1.4, 1.5, 0.6. I don't know how to do this faster, by the way. 1.7, maybe that'll work.
At least. Economic Freedom Index, broadly defined, including all 5 criteria.
Oh, no, we weren't talking about the video. You were talking about growth in government slowing down. At least I assume. Again, sorry, there's a big delay here.
Only one of which is government, increased from 1970 to 2000, and is now sort of plateaued. So economic freedom generally has increased. Deregulation of various industries, all of that stuff. Would you concede then that there's some coincidence? You're not granting correlation, but definitely a coincidence.
No, I mean, I don't think I would. I think that it's a very, sometimes, you know, really smart people and really good scientists can overestimate how much science can really understand, and it's very difficult to measure how free exactly you think a society is. Okay. The size and scope of government has gotten dramatically bigger in that time period. If Alex wants to argue that it wasn't quite as rapid, I would probably, maybe he's right about that. I mean, obviously World War II has got to be the biggest, most dramatic expansion of, you know, the pure power of the U.S. government. But no, that really that's the point anyway.
But you don't see deregulation of airlines, deregulation of trucking, deregulation of finance, a lot of movement toward economic freedom that occurred over this period that had nothing to do with government. Do you see?
Oh, yes, I agree with you. Those things occurred over that period.
Okay,
sure.
just a quick not important, sorry to belabor it. Alex, Milton Friedman has famously said, you can have a welfare state or you can have free immigration, but you can't have both. What do you say to that statement?
So the next line in that quote by Friedman is always forgotten. That's why Friedman supports illegal immigration, because they don't have access to the welfare state. And I think what we need to take a look at here is Friedman is making an empirical claim that immigrants use a ton of welfare, that more people are going to come. As a result of this, it's going to bankrupt the country and fleece the taxpayers. And that may have been true when Friedman said that. The evidence is it's absolutely not true now. And even if it is easier to build a higher wall around welfare than it is to build one around the country, and certainly more libertarian. Welfare is already pretty severely restricted in this country. It should be more restricted. I mean, I'd get rid of the entire welfare state if I could. But it already is fairly restricted. It should be more restricted. And that is something that we can build on, and I think certainly consistent, or at least partly consistent with libertarianism.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think this is a valid point from Alex here. It's like, well, attack the welfare state. If we can mobilize all this support to try and support closed borders, trying to support Trump in his immigration restriction, then why can't we do the same but focusing on the actual problem, right?
You're not making the claim that I thought Brian Kaplan made. You're not claiming that even if we just did nothing, immigrants get less welfare, we would still have a pretty neutral fiscal effect from immigration. That the claims that immigrants are costly are invalid. Are you making that even if we did nothing?
Yes.
I'm making that claim.
Yeah, I'm making that claim right now. So one of the big costs of people is public education. Enormously expensive. Average of about $20,000 per student per year. Now what happens when a 20-year-old moves here? We don't pay for any of their education, but they start working immediately. That is one of the big secrets in a lot of these fiscal welfare studies about how immigrants come in and how they're net taxpayers. Is that somebody comes to the age of 20, even if they don't have much education, right? They start working, they're paying. Meanwhile, somebody like me, I went to school in Southern California. I cost that state like $200,000. I'm like $200,000 in the hole when I start working. It's gonna take me a lot of years to build up. I'm never paying California back. Forget them. But but it's immigrants come in right away and they're just like that. We get basically a freebie.
So, David,
I mean, the government gets a freebie.
Well, taxpayers get more workers in a larger economy, more friends,
yeah, but
more
you were talking about
entrepreneurs,
paying taxes. Okay, the government gets more money. What libertarians love, more taxes being paid.
It's better than.
I think that's kind of a dishonest response to Alex's point here, because he was asked a question about like, well, the big fear is that they're going to come in and bankrupt the state. Because I mean, it was David Friedman's whole. It was the Friedman. Sorry, not David Friedman. Milton Friedman's whole point by like, well, you can't have an immigration system and open immigration and a welfare state. And then Alex was like, well, they're forgetting the second part of that is that he supports illegal immigration, therefore, because then they don't take out of welfare. And then he's establishing like, well, even if we have, as it goes on in this current day, even if we had total open immigration, you wouldn't expect this massive drain on the welfare system because you get a freebie, right? You get somebody who has already gone through what would be the biggest cost on the welfare system, and they're already starting working right away. So I think that's kind of dishonest. Like, oh, well, the government gets more money. I think that's a dishonest response there.
Now, taxpayers getting fleeced by immigrants who take more. Certainly, it's better that way than that, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you then. I thought that you were concerned in respect to obviously taxpayers pay for the education of immigrant children, so you don't like taxpayers being fleeced. It seems as though we're having difficulty this evening because we're going to get way into the numerical weeds. Alex.
Input error says the speed is too fast now. Okay. Normal. We'll try that.
Making the claim that immigrants are, with respect to the fiscal cost, including everything, including schooling, approximately neutral.
Yeah, Monohop. Dave is playing both sides here. On the one hand, net taxpayer is good. On the other hand, it's bad that immigrants come here and become net taxpayers. Yeah, it's like, again, he's trying to walk one foot in both paths at the same time, like always.
that they are not costly. I believe you may, do you doubt that? Do you regard it as irrelevant, or do you think that the opposite is the case? Are they costly to the taxpayer?
I doubt that. It's also irrelevant to my argument. But from what I've seen of studies that Alex has co-published himself, that oftentimes this will be over a 30-year horizon where we'll say then eventually the immigrants start paying it back. But the question, this is more...
I'm leaving the fucking speed just what it is right now. For fuck's sake. I'll increase it one increment. Oops, daisies, that's going to be too much. Normal speed. Speed. Faster. Speed. Faster, fine. Alright, that's 1.6 speed. Stay in there.
More fundamental, and you kind of can just think about this as a person and don't even have to worry about that. The question is, look, if somebody who, forget the way we use welfare, let's think of welfare the way libertarians think of welfare. Because everything the government does, essentially. So if you're saying there's an immigrant, if there is an immigrant family who comes here uninvited, and they come into the country, immediately they have access to the roads, the fire departments, the police, the emergency room.
Right, but the same is true also of babies, Dave, right? So should the government go around and say, I don't know if you're going to be making enough money to support this child, so we're not going to allow you to have any children. Should it be government standards deciding on when people have children? Like, that's the analogy here, right? If you're going to establish, like, well, everything the government does is welfare, so everybody's going to be a drain on welfare, then if being a drain on welfare, potential drain on welfare establishes that the government can come in and aggress against you, well then birth restrictions fall right out of that.
The public schools, all types of things that the taxpayer's on the hook for. Now, if Alex wants to argue, and he has demonstrated in some of his studies, that those costs will be offset by later, those immigrants working, and then the second and third generation, fine. But it's the taxpayer ought to have some choice in whether they feel like laying out that money or not.
But how do you establish what the taxpayer's choice is, right? And, do these freebies, as Alex calls them, do they also get a say? Do they get to have a choice? Right? How are we establishing what the choice is, if not just democratic vote? How is this not just democracy, the god, right?
And I don't think that the libertarian answer is to say that, like, if you're forced to essentially give a loan to someone but you get the money back, therefore that's libertarian. By the way, the point I was making before is that this is the nature of government, right? They screw you coming and going. It doesn't matter. If people are getting welfare...
No, Alex isn't saying that it's libertarian. Alex is saying that it's more libertarian than enforcing forced disintegration by saying nobody's allowed to give loans to anybody. Right? Alex is saying that that's an additional infringement on rights.
Services, then yeah, the taxpayer was forced to fund that. And if they end up paying more taxes, they're just giving this criminal organization that robs me and you more money. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the state.
One of the best observations by Ludwig von Mises in his theory of interventionism was that one government regulation or law causes other problems that then require other regulations to fix, and this sort of never-ending cycle until you get total government control over society. So what we have here is Dave saying there were some problems caused by public schools, by welfare, and these other things, and the solution is even more government control over the movement of people across borders. I think he's falling into this trap that Ludwig von Mises identified as being one that leads increasingly toward more state and government control over the economy. And I think the duty, the goal, the point of libertarians is to push back against the state control, not to try to make little compromises here and there and try to play the political economy game as if there's more than like 50 of us in the entire world and we can control political outcomes, is to try to think through what kind of system, what kind of rules maximize individual liberty, maximize our freedom, maximize our prosperity.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Can I ask Alex a question?
Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Okay,
yes.
like a hypothetical question. Let's say there's a government, could be a foreign country. Let's say it's in Sweden. The government is doing something me and you would both agree it shouldn't be doing. Yeah. And let's say you're there and you convince them all with your superior arguments. The government has a factory and it's producing shoes. And Alex, you convince them that this should be privatized. Like, the government doesn't need to be in the business of making shoes. The market will do it much better. This factory should be privatized. And there were two proposals for privatization that were on the table. And so proposal A was, I don't know, something like, we're going to privatize this company and all of the taxpayers will get like a share in it, or the people who homesteaded it will get a share in it or something like that. And then proposal B was, we're going to privatize this company and it will 100% be owned by a Chinese firm. That had nothing to do with paying the taxes, nothing to do with building it, none of that. Is one of those proposals preferable to the other?
Well, I would say the people who homesteaded it should get it, right? But the people who homesteaded it are going to be, right, we're releasing all restrictions on this. Have at it. First come, first served. Yeah, they should be allowed to say what should be done with it.
Depends whatever gets the maximum price. Whatever you sell the asset for at the highest price.
I will say that is an interesting response. Of course, he's an economist. He's going to go for that type of thing. But yeah, this is not necessarily like... I mean, Dave was definitely expecting him to say, well, the taxpayers who paid into it should get a preference. I don't think Dave was necessarily expecting that response.
which will partly, hopefully, compensate the poor Swedish taxpayer who's had to suffer,
Well, why?
at least for a tax
Why?
rebate, for the crappy government shoes they've had to wear for so
Wait,
long.
so hold on, Alex. I just want to be clear
whatever
on this.
maximizes the
Hold on,
profit.
so I want to be clear on this, okay? So if the taxpayers are forced to build something, you do not think that they have any better claim on that? Like in those two scenarios, everyone in this room cannot say that there isn't one that's clearly preferable.
But see, the thing is, Dave, you can't just appeal to it. Doesn't everyone in this room see that the taxpayers should have a better, like, you have to actually establish from first principles why that is the case. The taxpayers having a better claim on it than anybody else. Like, you have to establish this, Dave. Like, you can't just appeal to, like, well, people must think this, right? It doesn't work. Just as a strategic point and as a logical point.
Which is that the taxpayers who have been forced to build and fund the maintenance of this thing get it, rather than some Chinese company who had absolutely nothing to do with it. They just get it. Like, it just seems to me, Alex, like the answer is so obvious, but you just don't like the implication
No,
of what that answer would be.
I'm thinking like an economist who believes in getting maximum price for the assets that you sell. Obviously, I think the Swedish government should get the maximum price it can for the assets it sells and use that to do a rebate on the taxpayers of Sweden, rather than trying to give it
okay,
out.
but that second part, yeah, but that second part kind of
some kind
sneaks
of
out.
like centrally planned scheme.
Okay,
We see countries
hold
around the world
on,
try to privatize state-owned assets for the schemes that you justify, and it doesn't work. It didn't
Wait,
work.
hold on. Just so, but it would
There's
go
a
as
lot of other things going on here.
Alex, but it would go as a rebate back to the taxpayer. So, like, if I were to steal money from you and buy a house, and then I'm out of money, there's no, like, it's rightful that it should go to you. It should just go to whoever I can get the most money for. But you see, he snuck in there on the condition that I'm giving the money back to you afterward. So that's kind of like, okay, why? Why should the money go back to the taxpayers?
Because they own it. Because they got.
Oh,
fleeced.
do they?
Because they got fleeced.
Oh,
I think Dave's going to make a mistake here. Alex said because they own it. What is it? The tax money, right? They own the tax money. That's why the tax money should go back as a rebate. He didn't say that they own the shoe factory, and in fact, Dave, in his opening statement, said that they don't collectively own the shoe factory. So I'm not sure what Dave thinks this will establish.
It's interesting that you said that, Alex. You heard it here. That's all I needed. Because they own it. That's right, Alex. They sure do.
Yeah. And let's see how they vote with their dollars, ladies and gentlemen.
No, this is not the response here, Alex. You need to say, like, well, this doesn't actually establish what you think it establishes, Dave. I was saying that they own the tax money, not that they own the factory, and you agree that they don't own the factory. Like, that's the line of attack. You don't just go back to your talking points, right? That's because then Dave is flowing through here.
Through their politicians once every 5 or 6 years, but through their tax dollars. What do? They buy goods and services from immigrants. Nobody believes this story about government owning.
Like, you need to show the contradiction in Dave's argument, where Dave says that they don't own it, and now he's saying, like, well, so then they own it. Like, you got to show that contradiction there and pin him down on it.
Ownership of property and them trying to behave like private owners.
Nobody believes the story. You just agreed with the story. It's your words. They own it. Listen, the idea that if there's a
They own the tax.
You don't agree with that, Dave. You don't agree that they own it. You don't think that, right? You said that in your opening statement. You said that other libertarians take the argument a little too far, where they say that the net taxpayers own the government property, and you disagree with that. So it's like, this doesn't establish anything here, Dave. You're contradicting yourself.
Dollars that was taken from them that should be given back to them. That was taken from them. They're owed the money back from them.
Yes, there you go. Alex, hammer that point in. They're owed the money back. The money. Well, you really need to hammer this.
Like, okay.
How do Americans vote with their dollars, ladies and gentlemen? Do they vote for
talking points are not going to help you out here.
closed borders, or do they buy things from immigrants every day? Their
listen,
the way they vote with their dollars matters a lot more than how they vote in a polling booth every couple of years.
I mean, it's a fair argument to make, that how they vote with dollars, especially if we're taking voluntary exchanges as the fundamental here, that matters a whole lot more than, well, what they say to a pollster. This was the one rhetorical win that Dave got, and it relied on misidentifying both his own position and Alex's position. Yeah.
So the truth is that the American people really, really agree with Alex's immigration policy.
I say we should let the market decide.
Yeah.
Let's let the market decide.
I agree. I have no problem.
I'm not a socialist. I don't want the government to decide these things. Let the market decide when people vote with their dollars.
The pure market decision was the UN and NGOs funding caravans by the hundreds of thousands.
No, I oppose.
The pure free market, ladies and gentlemen.
So look,
come on,
Dave is trying to have it both ways. He's trying to say immigration is a government program. It only exists because of the government. But we can't liberalize immigration because then too many people will come. Which is it?
That's not having it both ways. The point is that I'm saying it's a government program.
It's not a government program any more than free trade is.
That's not true.
Yes, and Alex, you really need to hammer in why it's not the same as any other government program. You really need to hammer in, well, this is a null policy. It's saying the government shall not make rules in this area. It's equivalent to the Second Amendment or the First Amendment, right? These are not just other government programs. These are not just other government policies. They're not the same thing. They're different in kind.
And here's the crucial difference.
It's not any more
Hold on
than
one second, Alex. Here's the crucial difference between free trade. And it does seem, I don't know if you guys are picking up on this so far, but I was kind of interested in how Alex was going to grapple with the arguments I'm presenting, and it's turning out he's just not going to. But here's the major difference between free trade and immigration, right? When you have free trade, it's a voluntary interaction. A business purchases something from a foreign country.
And businesses hire immigrants. So we need to go into whose consent actually matters when it comes to voluntary exchanges. This is why Dave's foundation here doesn't actually work as a foundation at all.
That is a voluntary interaction. When hundreds of thousands of people come into this country against the will of the domestic population.
Not against the will of everybody, though. Presumably, some people are okay with it, right? Like the people in blue states who are now like developing apps where it says, hey, there's ICE agents around here, so stay out of this area. Or if you're a protester, go in and try and block them. Clearly, there are people who are in favor of immigration. Right? There are people in favor of mass immigration. So not everybody. So how are you calculating this all, Dave?
When nobody invited
The
them
will
here.
of the people.
Yes,
Come on,
Alex.
man. No, they buy.
Yes, human beings have will.
You need to hammer this in more, Alex. You can't just say the will of the people. Like, yes, that is a valid point. That's nonsense. You need to hammer in, well, this is a Platonist argument. This is a collectivist argument, and it doesn't follow. There is no will of the American people. There is only individuals can have a will. You really need to hammer this in and get Dave to say, yeah, I'm a collectivist. I think groups can have wills. Like, okay, then you need to establish that that's nonsense. Like, you can't just have the rhetorical flourish and not be able to back it up.
Individuals have wills. When they get together, there is a group of individuals.
Oh, the government has a will. Okay.
This again, Alex. You can't just say, well, the government has a will. You have to say, okay, Dave. Yes, indeed, only individuals have wills. So what does it mean by the will of the American people? What does that mean, right? Because you're saying that the will of the American people is to not have open borders. What does that specifically mean? Because some people in America want to have open borders, right? I know several Americans who want to have open borders, right? So those people's will isn't aligned. So what is the will of the American people? What does that mean? And then you'll have to say, well, it's this 95+% people think this. So, okay, so there's an appeal to popularity. You're using the popularity of this position to establish that it is the legitimate position. That is what establishes what is voluntary. What is voluntary, that concept comes from what is agreed on by this nebulous blob, right?
No, I didn't. No,
listen.
But see, no, hold on.
Wants
I'm
to
sorry.
buy.
That's a
Immigrants
bullshit.
want to sell their labor. Americans want to buy their labor. We want to buy and sell. It's voluntary.
By the way,
It's
Alex,
voluntary.
here's the funny thing. The government does have a will, and the people have a will. I've been talking about the will of the people. The will of the government has been very close to Alex's
No,
policy.
it hasn't. It
If
has
you
been
want to be honest about
95%
it.
closed borders. Ladies and gentlemen, I appeal to you to something called facts. They are the diagram in your table of what the Soviet-style immigration system actually looks like. If you think this is anything close to open borders, my God, I've got multiple bridges in the city to sell.
I want to jump in. I want to jump in and ask a question.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point by Alex there. Like, if the government truly wanted open borders, then why is the immigration system so closed down? Like, the government could make it open if they wanted to.
Okay, Alex. Dave challenged one point about the apparent what his view was of the apparent inconsistency between your idea that you want an Ellis Island type system versus open borders. You are saying, if I understand you correctly, that all illegals would be told if you report to a checkpoint, you have a general amnesty, report to a checkpoint, and submit to the government's query about your state of health, your mental health, your criminal background, submit to all of that, and then you can qualify to be a citizen. First of all, I take it anybody who doesn't respond to that, you would join Dave in evicting them.
I think it is the government's responsibility to prove that an individual shouldn't be here, and if they're a violent and property criminal, if they're spreading a disease, if they're a terrorist or something like that, they should treat them like they do every criminal or somebody who should be in jail or somebody who should be quarantined for making everybody sick.
You would evict them.
Yes, absolutely. Violent, all these people who don't, who are criminals, who violate other people's rights, yes.
Comment from you, Dave, about that.
So, do you support an Ellis Island style system to get into the country?
It'd be a vast improvement over what we have now. So yeah, it's a vast improvement.
Right, so yeah, then Alex has lost the debate, right? Because that is an immigration restriction. I don't necessarily know if Dave will be able to capitalize on this that fully, but we'll see.
That was the vote.
Okay, but so what's not an improvement? What do you support?
So I think that if you, it should be on the government to prove for each individual who wants to come to the United States that they're not allowed, with the goal of keeping out violent and property offenders or people who spread serious contagious diseases, national security threats, terrorists, and situations like that. People like that.
Yeah, but that's not the question. I'm not saying who should be kept out. I'm saying what system do you support? An Ellis Island style system? You said that would be preferable, but what would be even preferable to that?
Well, I just laid out, like if you want to come through an airport to the United States and the government says, you know, we think you're a criminal, we can prove it, and if they can prove it through due process, then they should be able to exclude you.
And when you say, okay, so if they're...
Sort of the same legal thing that we would apply to anybody else, like to you and I, if we were like out of jail and wanted for a crime or something.
Okay.
One.
Yeah, so I mean, he didn't. I think Alex managed to skirt past it effectively there. So maybe Alex hasn't lost the debate just yet.
One final question, which I want to lob at Dave and then have Alex respond. Dave, let's say that it's 1910. Mm-hmm. Where we sit.
You just turned 30. I love him. He's my mentor. This guy, love this guy so much.
Love him back. Love him back. Love him back.
And Dave said he wasn't going to piss off a Jew tonight.
For those of you guys watching, if you rewind the tape, I said I wasn't going to piss off the Jews tonight.
Dave.
There's two over here, buddy.
I love Dave. He didn't piss me off. And I turned 80, and doing something, this is the best job you could possibly have if you're 80 years old. It doesn't take up all your time, but it gives you something to do in the morning. I love it. And I love you guys being here. I love Dave being here.
So,
with that,
thanks, Gene.
We love you, Gene.
It's
1910.
Okay. Yes. Now, I'm going to play, just briefly, of course, the emotional card is that all four of my grandparents went to Ellis Island, and they submitted to all that bullshit. They had to prove this, they had to prove that. And by the way, the German Jews who lived uptown didn't want them to set foot in this country. All the evidence, the Italians were streaming in. Some of them, as we know from Godfather 2, were bringing mafia. The population just didn't want my grubby ancestors, I don't know if they were your grubby ancestors as well, from coming in. And they had to submit pretty much to what Alex is saying. Now, I'm happy that they did, personally, but that's irrelevant. The only question really is this. In 1910, would you have taken the same position about these immigrants moving in, sending their kids to school, that you do now? Or is it because you take a different position because there was less welfare?
Well, I mean, okay, so I essentially think, as I was saying, that the way libertarians ought to think about this is that the people of the country ought to have some say in this. And that's not to say that, you know, this isn't what, I'm not saying the will.
Like, ought to have some say is such a vague term. Like, what say? Like, you know, this should have been hammered out really heavily. Like, what specific say should they have? Like, what specifically does that mean?
Of the government, or that the government perfectly, you know, expresses the will of the people. I'm just saying that once the government has taken from the people, and
again, he's then going back to the will of the people. Like, he keeps using this phrase, and then when Alex slightly drilled him on it, he was like, "No, I mean will of individuals." It's like, well, what does the will of the people mean then?
Created this public property, then yeah, that should be more of a factor than say what the will of some destitute person. Now, in this example, listen, it's kind of almost like asking from a libertarian position to me, look, if there were like, if some homeless people showed up at my house tonight and were like, hey, we want to stay here. Can we stay in your house? You guys.
So then he's analogizing immigration to a country to somebody wanting to get into his house. But then that would require that some particular person owns the United States. But he says that the taxpayers don't own the United States. So does he think that one specific person owns the entire United States? Like, these are the things which really need to be hammered out with a solid property theory.
Some extra room. It's like the decision ought to be mine because it's my house, and I can judge that against what. Now, if the story was that homeless guy was like my grandfather or your grandfather, I might be very happy if they were taken in. And I think at points in American history, it worked pretty well, probably better than almost any country ever, at bringing people in and assimilating them. Now, if you're asking me, do I think the fact that in 1910 there was no welfare state and no central bank and no income tax and no regulatory state, and no culture of kind of, there was a culture of you're either going to work hard and make it or you're going to have to go home. We don't have that same culture here today. And there was also a culture of like embracing, at least to some degree, that capitalism and kind of rugged individual mindset. And so I think, yeah, it's probably not going to work as well in large numbers today as it did back then.
To go with that analogy real quick, if I may, the homeless person comes to your house, asks for a room, it's your property. The proper analogy is you say yes, and the government comes and says, no, you can't. Mm-hmm. This is all, I think the point that Dave is not looking at is the voluntary interaction that is the basis of this. Americans want to hire immigrants. They want to rent to them. They want to sell to them. They want to buy from them. They want to marry them, and all this stuff. There's a voluntary interaction at the core of this that is present in all these situations. And in that analogy used, it's the government coming in and saying, giving their answer for you about how you use your property and interact with people.
All right, can I just, let me respond, because I do think this might be like right at the heart of the entire debate. This is, for Alex to say that look, this is a voluntary interaction that the government is just getting in the middle of. You know, like the people want these immigrants in, and then the government's telling you, no, they can't. I'm not saying that that's never true in any instance. I mean, there certainly are instances where someone in America has a cousin in Italy and wants to invite him over here, and they got to go through that whole thing that Alex just showed you. And yeah, libertarians should be against that. But man, is Alex missing the forest for the trees if he thinks that's the description of immigration in present-day America. What the American people actually wanted, in terms of the popular vote, was Donald Trump back in the White House, because that's how much Biden's immigration.
Yeah, but again, Alex already has the point on the flow that what they vote for every 4 years doesn't actually matter as much as what they vote for with their dollars, right? That doesn't matter. Americans want to eat their cake and have it too. If you ask the Americans to have a vote, hey, we're going to increase welfare so that everybody gets infinity welfare and nobody has to be taxed a penny and we won't print any money. Most Americans would vote, yeah, I want that. I want all the goodies with none of the costs. Like, it's really irrelevant completely.
Hold on one second. Let me just finish, then please respond. The issue is that when you have a situation like we've had over the last few years, where millions of people are pouring into the country uninvited, that the American people did not ask to be here, the scenario is not, I'm trying to have my friend into my house and the government's stopping me. The scenario that we've all been living through is the American people are screaming at the top of their lungs, we don't want this. We do not wish to have this level of...
Yeah, they're screaming at the top of their lungs, we don't want this, and also we're going to act in a way where we try and benefit from it without any of the costs. It's like, as per usual, the masses are just retarded.
Immigration, and the government is saying, screw you, you're taking it anyway. And the fact that after some people have gotten in here uninvited, that some people trade with them, that does not prove that they were invited, that it's a voluntary reaction. The American people are screaming at the top of their lungs. This is not voluntary.
David,
Wait, Gene.
I just want to make the point that your answer to my 1910 question was good. I just want to add, as you probably know, not only did the Gentiles object to us Jews coming in, the German Jews didn't want us. If there was a vote, we were not welcome in 1910. Immigrants, generally speaking, they're strange, they're grungy, generally speaking.
They made some good points.
Okay, but listen.
But that aside,
guys, the American voters were furious, and rightly so, at the chaos along the border. Why were those people coming in illegally? Because of the border socialism and control over this. Why are people selling drugs on the streets? Because drugs are illegal. Yeah, people are mad at that. The solution is to legalize drugs. The solution is to legalize immigration. It is not the duty of libertarians to come in and go, you know what? That socialist government-controlled system that the people really want, yeah, that's great. Now, our duty is to come in and say these problems, which are real problems. These are real problems with illegal immigration and border chaos, but they are caused by the government, and the solution here, as in almost every single area in our lives, is getting the government out of the way.
Yeah, it's a perfectly valid response.
I want to now give it over to audience questions. The microphone is over there.
All right, just before it goes into audience questions, I'm just going to get a refill in my water, so I'll be right back. You know. All right, audience questions. Let's see if any of these are impressive.
And I will recognize people up at the balcony. So please ask your question. Ask a question. No need to identify yourself. Lay it on us. What's your question?
So I want to refocus the debate on the fact that it's focusing on the American present moment. So Alex, considering the debate focuses and centers the argument on present-day America, where in places like Aurora, Colorado, and parts of Ohio, immigrants are negatively impacting American communities, and where the state still compels taxpayers to fund expansive welfare systems and programs that support immigrants, and where Americans, as Dave mentioned, voted overwhelmingly for this restriction on immigration after, some would argue, after seeing European communities decimated by open border immigration. How does that impact?
Hey, I know this guy. He follows me on Twitter. Yeah, runs the Sovereign House, another debate thing in New York.
Back to your argument that you're making.
That's just
After, some would argue, after seeing European communities decimated by open border immigration, how does that impact your argument that you're making? Can you please frame it into this current moment that we're living in as Americans? Thank you.
Nope.
Oh, could you clarify your question?
Just anchor your arguments in the current moment we're living in America, as the debate resolution states. So currently in America, Americans are anti-immigration after seeing Europe decimated with open border immigration. Places like Aurora, Colorado, where these hotels were taken over, are negatively impacting the American experience.
Okay, I think I get it now.
Just anchor it in the current moment.
So all the problems you described are caused by state intervention and state regulations in other areas of the economy. The government funding welfare systems, the government funding public schools, the government in Europe, for instance, which makes it illegal for large numbers of migrants to even get a job if they want to, forces them on the welfare. Listen, Europe has a bunch of problems. To pretend that Europe has a
Hoppian of Asgard says in the chat, Dave is very good debater, and that I would lose in a debate against Dave Smith. Oof. I mean, if you think Dave is a good debater, I would suggest you watch my stream with Monhop going over responding to Mentis, and then after that I analyze the debate Dave did. He's not a good debater. Dave Smith exclusively debates people who are constituted such that he can beat them in a debate. He does not debate people who are at all rigorous with their thinking. The instant he gets into a debate about philosophy, he just crumbles. Right? He could not withstand a day in the Discord debate bro minds. Would not work. And also, yeah, Dave has been dodging me for a long time. For good reason.
Open borders, they have a system similar to this. The problem, of course, is large amounts of illegal immigration and a lot of those migrants not being allowed to work, being forced to be on welfare. Yeah, there's lots of problems in other places, right? We're focusing on present-day America, but most of those problems, vast majority of them, are caused by other government interventions in the economy. And if this were any other public policy issue we were talking about, Dave and I would agree that that is the issue. The issue is the government policies and restrictions on our liberty, not the people necessarily who take advantage of it.
Comment from you, Dave.
I think, listen, I think this is a problem that some guys at Cato, and libertarians in general, libertarians I love, have a problem of doing, is that sometimes we almost want to impose the way we would like it to be onto the world. This is not...
Yeah, sometimes they get caught up in trying to impose the way they want it to be, and trying to impose that on the world. Who does that sound like, Dave Smith?
Alex, by the way, I'm making fun of other people at Cato here. This is my favorite thing that I've ever seen from Cato. This was a study in 2021, and they did a write-up of it. What they found is that, and this was really good numbers, they were celebrating how high the numbers were. 23% of Americans wanted a high level of immigration. 68% of Americans wanted a low level of immigration. 9% of Americans wanted no immigration. Cato wrote this up and said, only 9% of Americans want zero immigration. 91% welcome immigration. Do you see how you could sometimes put, listen, I understand what Alex is saying. We would have large areas of agreement about how much government interventions create other problems that then beget other government interventions. That's true. If you think the only reason why people were upset at the Biden immigration was the...
Kojoltad asks, did you see Dave debate Larkin Rose? I did not. I could watch that at some point as well. Depending on the topic, I don't know. Might be interesting.
Chaos at the border, as your guy...
Yeah, and then not...
Let me just say this. As your guy said, since 1965, for most of the years, it's been single digits of Americans who supported high levels of immigration. The truth is that the American people don't want these people here. And the problem is that if you're not willing to grapple with that kind of uncomfortable reality, you're going to get... You could run me all the regressions you want to about how immigrants expand the economy, they contribute more to the economy. Therefore, if we have Alex's immigration policy, which will probably lead to 5, 10, 20 million immigrants coming here next year, we're going to get this big explosion in GDP. Let me tell you what we're going to get. We're going to get Pinochet elected president. That's what you're going to get if you have immigration.
I sure wish you appealed to libertarian principles as much as you appeal to public opinion.
I actually am.
Okay.
No, you're actually not. All you're doing is democratic fundamentalism. What does the median voter want? What does this poll say? What does this survey say?
Well, Alex,
this debate is about libertarianism and libertarian principles. I wish you would stick to that rather than making these arguments about...
He's drilling something outside. But yes, Alex is entirely correct. Stick to libertarian principles. But Dave thinks he is sticking to libertarian principles because he thinks that this establishes that it's not a voluntary interaction. Alex needs to attack that point specifically and explicitly.
Oh, gee, I wonder what the moderate Republican wants. We gotta do what that guy wants.
Alex, I'm sorry. Hold on.
Who cares?
Okay, my audio is clipping now. I'm just going to turn down because they keep shouting. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. Sorry if that was annoying there. Right, yeah, -1. That's fine. Zulu needs to debate Jay Dyer. Gee whiz. I mean, I did. And he ran away halfway through.
Okay, fine. You can say that. You can say, who cares? Listen, I do think in my opening, I was making an appeal to libertarian principles. If you don't agree with them, that's fine. Let me tell you this. When you say, who cares, you're making empirical claims about what's going to happen if we have higher levels of immigration. When you say this appeal to democracy, it's called, something libertarians don't like that much, living in reality.
Oh my fucking god, Dave. It's not called living in reality. It's called argumentum ad populum. That's what it's called.
That's what we live in. We live in a country that has votes. We have a presidential election every 4 years. What was the result of record high numbers of people coming into this country illegally? The result was Donald Trump winning every swing state and the popular vote. You guys want to deal with reality a little bit? What do you think it would be if we took the numbers that came in under Joe Biden and multiplied them by 5 or 10?
Literally none of this matters. Like, this is so clearly just an argumentum ad populum. It's like, well, as more people come in, the Americans are more, they vote against it more and more and more. It's like, but what does this establish, Dave? Monhop, for $3, thank you very much. Single digit people want automatic weapons. Yeah, exactly. And like, this doesn't matter. If you had tomorrow the Supreme Court enforced the Second Amendment, they decided that, oh, wait a minute, they dusted off their copy of the Constitution. This thing right here says, oh, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Did you guys see this one? Oh my god, I never saw that before. Oh my god, quick, stamp it into law. We need, all these gun regulations need to go. Do you know what would happen? They would have like fucking Democrat 9,000 would come out and say, we need to tear up the Constitution and abolish any right of owning guns. That's what would happen. Okay, Dave? So this doesn't actually establish anything.
What do you think this country's going to look like? And is that just me making an appeal to what the average voter thinks? I'm making an appeal to what type of country our children are going to grow up.
And Dave has the gall to call me a Beltway libertarian? He calls me a Beltway libertarian in Cato? That is the most in the swamp argument that I've ever heard from a libertarian. My God, man. Where are your principles?
Somebody in the cheap seats, you got a question?
That's a derogatory term.
Please. What's your question?
Sorry, seating challenge individual.
Yeah, seating challenge.
Ask your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. It's been wonderful, great styles. Coming to a libertarian debate, you guys are talking a lot from the government perspective. I'm just really surprised because at the individual perspective, from individual liberty, looking from the immigrant's perspective, right? What have they done wrong? You understand? When you're talking about immigration, you're prohibiting them from entering public spaces, from interacting in local marketplaces.
Yeah, perfectly valid question. What has the immigrant done wrong? Who specifically is the immigrant aggressing against? Which specific conflict is being initiated? Of course, if you were to ask that, Dave would say, well, there's all sorts of conflicts between immigrants. People don't like it. There's all because he doesn't understand what conflict even means. I guarantee you, if he brought up the word conflict, that's what would occur. But yeah, no. Eugenio Lianza, Zulu, why are you so obsessed with Dave Smith? He's a literal who here in Europe. Well, Dave Smith specifically, I'm writing a video at the moment centered around Dave Smith as like the archetype of the neo-Prag. I tried calling out the neo-Prags back when they were in their infancy, and unfortunately I failed. And now there's a whole lot more to talk about, a whole lot more to dive into with just how terrible these people are for the movement. They are really a horrible poison. And as much as we might not like it, Europe tends to just lag behind the US. If the US is doing something, Europe's going to follow along with it. The strings of the US culture war are really going to dictate the culture war pretty much everywhere else, at least in the West. But yes, so this question, valid. Who specifically is the immigrant aggressing against? Who is the immigrant harming here?
Those are normally rights that we really protect as libertarians, so I'm just a little confused as to what their crime is and why they've met the high bar of prohibiting them from that fundamental liberty.
The crime, it sounds like it's a question for you, Dave. Take it, Dave.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not claiming that the immigrants have done anything wrong.
Okay, so then you shouldn't restrict their movement. Done deal. Alex needs to capitalize on that a little bit there.
You know, I'm not saying they're bad people any more than I would be saying that if 5 homeless people knocked on my door and were like, hey, can we stay the night? Like, it's not that they're bad people. It's just I got a wife and 2 kids in here. And like, that's my decision.
Okay, it's your decision, okay? Because you have the right to say who is allowed in your house. Who has the right to say who's allowed in the United States of America? And you can't just say the American people, because the American people isn't a person. He can't own property. It doesn't exist. And you agree that he can't own property because you say in your opening statement, Dave said this in his opening statement, he thinks some libertarians go too far in saying that the taxpayers own government property. He said he disagrees with that. So he doesn't think that they own it. So it's disanalogous to his house example because he does own it. And Alex really needs to seize in on this. I don't know if he's necessarily picked up on that from Dave's opening, though.
I'm not a bad person for being like, no, I'm sorry, you can't come in. This is for my family. And the question of like
Kojoltad says, I mean, libertarianism is pragmatic. Absolutely not true at all. Pragmatism is the philosophy which says that the true is a species of the good. This is really their central thesis of pragmatism, is their theory of truth. So the pragmatist theory of truth says that, well, what it means to say that something is true, that means that it works. So if something works, then it is true. What this means, and they apply this across the board, so what it means to work is that it achieves some goal that you have. Okay, but this is going to be a goal, it's going to be a whim, it's going to be some purpose that your consciousness holds. But this is going to have to be a pre-logical whim, because logic itself, logic is correct if it works. So this is a pre-logical whim, just a brute desire that you have. That is the standard of the true. So it's primacy of consciousness all the way down. This is the opposite of principle. You can't have universal, immutable ethical principles on this view. Because, I mean, what works today might not work tomorrow. You might have a different whim tomorrow, right? You don't know, right? This is what pragmatism teaches. And of course, the average man on the street advocate of the philosophy of pragmatism isn't going to understand this core, but that really is the core of pragmatism. I mean, let's just look it up, right? Pragmatism. Let's just look it up. Is a philosophical tradition that views language and thought as tools for prediction, problem solving, and action, rather than describing, representing, or mirroring reality. So you can't have immutable principles on this view. Like, I think the pragmatists, people who are advocating pragmatism, pragmatic libertarianism, read Pierce, read James, read Dewey, right? Read these people, and you'll see. Sorry, I don't think this is necessarily. Read these people, read them, and see if they align with what you believe pragmatic libertarianism would consist of. And if they don't, well, what the hell does it consist of? Because this is the philosophy of pragmatism.
Restricting liberty. It's like, look, there is a legitimate restriction of liberty. If somebody is invited to the United States of America and they're not leeching off of the taxpayer and they're invited by a host and the government says, no, you can't come, no question, that's a violation of liberty. But I'm sorry, where exactly is the natural right to enter property uninvited that you do not own?
That's not
Not property, Dave. And you agree that it's not property. Right? You agree that the taxpayers don't own it. You agree with that.
what we're talking about.
That is what
We're talking about
that's not
private
what you're talking
property.
about. It's reality.
We're talking about
That's reality. This doesn't establish anything, Dave.
private property. I'm saying you should be able to invite anybody on your property from anywhere in the world without asking for permission from the state. Dave is saying you got to ask permission from dear leader.
No.
Come on.
No, hold on.
This is the easiest thing in the
Alex,
world.
well, it is if you completely misunderstand what I'm saying. I agree with you. You should be able to invite anybody you want onto your property.
So he agrees.
Yep, you'll get it. Don't worry, hang in there.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But that's not what characterizes the overwhelming majority of the people
Yes,
who have
it is.
It's not what characterizes the overwhelming majority of the people who have come into this country, specifically over the last few years. What you've had is waves of people uninvited by the millions. That's what's been going on, and that's what the American people are objecting to. And so, I know Alex likes to say they're all nativists or something like that, but like, I think I would recommend you listen to some of these people. There are very specific grievances that they have. Towns that have been completely transformed, where people are living there for 4 generations. 4 generations they've been paying.
Right, but again, he's still not establishing the question. He's not responding to the question. The question is, for some particular immigrant, who is he? What crime is he committing? You can't just say, well, there's these communities which were destroyed and blah, blah, blah. For some particular immigrant who wants to come in and you want to prevent him from coming in, prove that he's committing a crime. You can't. He's never done this.
Property taxes, and all of a sudden the local public school is majority not speaking English. It's made up by students that have come from this incredible...
Yeah, majority not speaking, that's not a crime. Me going into a country and not speaking the language of that country isn't a crime. Who am I aggressing against? What, because a bunch of other people in the area also don't speak the language? Like, this is not a crime, Dave. Right?
Incredibly brutal journey where many of them have been abused. Now, again, to your point, this doesn't mean I think those kids are bad kids. I don't think the kids who made this horrible journey who have been abused are bad kids, but also, I don't really think I would want my kids going to school with a bunch of traumatized kids who don't speak English.
He doesn't think they're bad. He doesn't think they're bad, but he wants the state to use its power. To let the state use its power to push them out.
You boo for that. You boo for me not wanting my children to be at school
You
with
want the
traumatized
government
kids.
to go after them with guns and
on.
deport them and take away their property
Wait, hold on now.
and shove them out of this country.
No, that's not what they booed for.
Boo at a libertarian event.
They booed for me saying that I don't want my 6- and 3-year-old kids to be going to school with traumatized kids who don't speak the language. And they booed for that.
Great argument for school choice.
Yes, we
Not
all
an
agree on
argument
that,
for
Alex.
closed borders.
Yes. No,
It's not an argument for closed borders. It's an argument for school choice.
Actually, it's an argument for both.
No, it's not. It's not.
Next question.
You guys spent the debate discussing what the federal government
Hey, Leibowitz. Here we go. Finally, some philosophy might get introduced here.
should and shouldn't do. But nobody brought up whether the federal government is actually authorized to do it. Now, Lysander Spooner notwithstanding, the Constitution is the law of the land. Do the two of you believe that the Constitution authorizes the federal government to place restrictions on immigration when it comes to peaceful people? And if you do, where in the Constitution is this authorization granted?
Sounds like a challenge for you, dude.
It's for both.
Well,
Yes, so, I mean, he's obviously taking a much more Randian approach to it. So, I mean, Dave could just say, well, I don't care about the Constitution. And then it's kind of dropped off the flow there. It's not necessarily the best line of attack, because Dave can just say, well, I'm an anarchist, so I don't care. But I mean, it's fair enough, right? Does the Constitution authorize the government to restrict immigration? Sure.
sounds like
I mean, I'm not really a constitutionalist or any type
Yeah.
of expert on it. I mean,
pass.
I'm arguing how I think libertarians ought to feel about this. And, there's lots of great things in the Constitution, but there's been lots of bad things in there too. So
you'll pass.
I don't know.
And you, any response to it?
Happy to share this with Dave if you want, Constitution. But there is no enumerated power for Congress to control immigration specifically. It was made up during the Progressive Era by a Supreme Court that said, it's like an inherent power of the sovereign, that mighty magical beast that channels the will of the people, the Leviathan. It's an inherent power because of like magic words and stuff. So no, there's no
Wasn't it,
power.
Alex, I'm sure you know this better than me, but wasn't it run by the states at the beginning of the Union? Like, wasn't it?
So it's like states in theory had that power. Almost none of them exercised it. So like Castle Island in New York, they set up like a place that was kind of like a pre-Ellis Island. But basically in the 85 years before the feds took it over, the states deported on total, I've been able to count about 7,000 people total, and most of them actually to other states. So basically they shoved them all in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well,
Hey, now
still-
we may have found a policy we can both support. Yeah, all right.
I support shoving everybody we don't want in Pennsylvania. Sorry.
I want-
Sorry, Philly, but
no,
we're gonna make
leave
it
that
better.
one cool.
I want to apologize to the audience. Guys, this will have to be our last question, and you can come to the party and confront the debaters afterwards. Final question from the balcony. Take it away.
Thank you. The resolution references peaceful and healthy people, seemingly off the table that non-peaceful or non-healthy people may have the right to come here without restrictions. You, Alex, spoke to that a little bit, and you said they might have due process when they get here, so they'd be innocent until proven guilty, rather than, I guess, the way it is now, where you're saying they have to prove their innocence. I'm wondering how that would work, because, right, that process begins when a crime happens and an accusation is levied. And then there's due process for the state or whoever to prove that the crime occurred. I don't think, to me, that could happen very easily in a large-scale Ellis Island type setting where people are coming in and no accusations have been levied against them. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
I mean, whether it can be done easily doesn't really pertain to whether or not that's just. Like, it just is an epistemic standard. It might be difficult for the government to prove that all of these people are criminals, but who cares? Who cares if it's difficult for the government to do? I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little practical concerns. Listen, one of the things that I think Dave and I probably agree on is we are very, very far from a libertarian world in practically every way, right? Now, there's lots of ways that we can imagine this stuff being done. You have one of the ways it was done before Ellis Island, actually, when criminals were barred, is that they usually look at like the manifests and basically just be like, hey, you're covered in face tattoos. The only people from Italy covered in face tattoos are criminals. We're just going to talk to you for a few minutes and check it out. But there's lots of practicalities. But man, I spend a lot of time in D.C. talking with bureaucrats and politicians about these things, and I'm just looking forward to having a drink so we can talk about principles.
I think that there's so one of the things that's kind of been interesting in this whole debate is that there just is this disconnect between how libertarians like to think about these things versus the reality of what we're living through. And I understand that. In my heart of hearts, I really don't ever want to be advocating that the government do anything to anybody. But the idea that you're going to say you have due process for, and there's very different arguments here. Making the argument that you have due process for someone before they're deported from this country is a very different argument than saying that anybody from anywhere in the world, whether invited or uninvited, has some due process right, like as if they get the presumption of you're allowed.
Yes, Dave, it's called the presumption of innocence. Yes, this is based on a more fundamental epistemic principle. Like, you can just say, well, this is going to be real difficult to do. That doesn't establish anything.
to be here before it can be pushed away. Look, again, there's just no way to do this without having a dramatic increase. And then, look, I'll just say this. Do you know, this is one of the craziest stats, and it was a little bit because the height was in the middle of Joe Biden's administration, but we had record high border crossings under Joe Biden, and then we have record low border crossings right now under Donald Trump. And so much of that isn't even just like a policy change. It's just like what the president is saying, what the impression is, that the bat signal that goes out to the world. If we were to say right now that we have Alex's immigration policy, anybody can come, and actually the burden is on us to prove that you're sick, or you're a terrorist, or you're a violent, whatever that means, or convicted of a violent crime once, are you being violent right now? Whatever exactly that means. I mean, you'd be sending out the bat signal to the world. This is why I was saying I'm not making an appeal to democracy or an appeal to popularity. I am making an appeal to reality.
The part of reality you're making an appeal to, though, is that all these people agree. So that is an appeal to popularity. Like, you're trying to, like, distance the steps there, but it still is an appeal to popularity.
And, like, I just don't know if libertarians really appreciate how destabilizing this would be for our society.
Could you start your 5 minutes of summary? Because it's your time for summary. So please.
You know, I was done right there, and now I'm a little mad at you. That seemed unnecessary. So, no, I'm sorry. Okay, can I sit here, or are we going back to the podiums?
You can sit on the floor. You can sit on the scale.
All right. Well, look, okay, let me... All right, 5 minutes of summary here. Let's try to touch on a few things here. Look, I really do... look, I have a lot of respect for Alex, and despite what we've had, I actually like Alex, and I'm really grateful that he came and did this here. I've enjoyed this. And I just don't think Alex is really grappling with the arguments that I've laid out. And so let me respond to a few of the things that he said. Number one, the idea that, as he spent a lot of his time arguing about like the way Donald Trump has been implementing this has been bad, or the way the government implements this is bad, and then said, well, I can't divorce myself from the government if you know, like if I support a policy, you know the government's going to violate rights. Yeah, but this would be an argument for murder being legal. I mean, if you want to say murder is going to be illegal, we know for a fact that the monopoly known as the government is going to mess that up. There are going to be people who go to jail and they were not guilty.
Yeah, so Dave, it's a question of policy versus null policy. What would the null policy be there? It would be that it would not be that the government prevents you from defending yourself and is going to also allow murder to go forth. That wouldn't be the null policy. The null policy would be the government steps away from law enforcement. That would be fantastic if the government stepped away from law enforcement. That would be brilliant, right? You know what would happen if you had this like sort of purge scenario where you just have an eternal purge? Well, what would occur if you had the right philosophy in place, of course, is all those insurance agencies would start taking over. That would be great. That would be fantastic. That would be the null policy there.
That is going to happen, okay? But like at the same time, I think it's reasonable saying like current environment, modern America, just saying murder's legal now, that really isn't going to be a great scenario. I don't think that's going to work out very well. Now, Alex also made the point, which I do not think is true, that if I was applying this to anything else, you know, if we were applying this to guns, he made the comparison to having kids. Oh, these kids are going to change the culture. But what's the major difference here, okay? The difference is that obviously having a child is a natural right. Obviously, like having a gun is a natural right. I think more reasonably.
So is going to the middle of the Nevada desert. That's a natural right. There's nobody who has the right to stop me, right?
The question would be, do I apply this within reason on government property at all? So would it be reasonable for, let's say, the government to have a rule about how you can't shoot up heroin on a public street? Yeah, actually, I do kind of think that would be reasonable. I think it's totally reasonable from the libertarian perspective to be like, hey, you can do that, but you got to take it home. You can't do it here. We will remove.
How would they transport it to their home, though? Because most people don't want heroin to be a thing. So am I not allowed to transport it on roads?
You don't have a right to be here. Is it reasonable, as I laid out in the beginning, for the government to have rules about who's allowed and not allowed to enter a public school? Yeah, I actually do think that. I think there are many reasonable restrictions that the government can have on public property, and obviously it does not extend from that. You could think of bad examples of it. You could extend this principle and think of some pretty disastrous reductio absurdums, but you could also recognize that the reductio absurdum to having zero restrictions would be equally as bad. You simply just can't operate a society this way. And so I think that Alex has kind of dodged the real central reality here, which is that it's not just that there was chaos at the border that was caused by the fact that we have this crazy over-regulated immigration system. That's true. That's certainly, like, it certainly is true that if you just said everyone's allowed to come here, then yeah, you wouldn't have had the exact same chaos at the border. But listen, man, as I said before, the American people are screaming at the top of their lungs and have been for decades and decades and decades. They don't want this level of immigration. And I really do think that kind of, to me, the moment of the debate was Alex saying that they own it, about the Swedish taxpayers.
Alex said that they own the money. The money. They own the money that was taxed from them. That's what the Swedish taxpayer owns, right? Individual taxpayers own the money that they were taxed. Dave hasn't grasped this.
Well, if that's the case, like if the case is that...
And also, Dave also thinks that that the taxpayers don't own government possessions. He said that in his opening statement. It is gone completely unaddressed.
They own it, or the case is that even if this factory, and listen, Alex, he's a very smart economist, so he made a fair point. Maybe if they could sell that factory to the highest bidder and then gave it back to the taxpayers, that would be a better deal than just directly giving the stock to the taxpayers. But I think the point still remains that we're all acknowledging that that taxpayer has more of a claim to it than somebody from the rest of the world. Let me just tell you this very, very quickly, and then I'll wrap up on this. If I go over by a few seconds, Alex, you get more time. Just very, very quickly. This is one of the things that turned me around on immigration because I used to completely agree with Alex. In fact, I would have taken it a little bit further. I was an open borders guy. And I saw this interview of this guy who was an immigration restrictionist. And they were asking him why he supports these immigration restrictions. And he literally said what I was talking about just at the end of the question and answer segment. They lived in a border town in Texas. And he was like, he goes, I've lived here, I'm in the same house as my grandfather. We've lived in this town for generations. He goes, my grandkids go to the public school. I went to that school. My father went to that school. My grandfather went to that school. We've been paying property taxes this entire time. And in just a few years, the school's been transformed. And it's now majority of the kids don't speak English. Many of them have been traumatized. I know some people mock me over that. Let me tell you something I know about you that you don't know already. You don't have kids. And for the rest of the people in this crowd, for the rest of the people who do have children, you can understand where, like, that'd be very concerning. And you would sit here and go, hey, I've been the taxpayer this whole time. This money was stolen from me. He wasn't a libertarian. He may not have said it exactly like that, but it has been. Like, how come I don't get a say in this? And when the numbers are so overwhelming, the American people do not want this. And if there's one thing libertarians should understand, you're going to force something this major on the American people when they do not want it, expect a backlash. And it's not going to be what you guys want.
Right, but again, none of this actually gets at the heart of the issue, which is what are the principles, right? You can't appeal to, well, there's going to be backlash and people really don't want this. That doesn't matter. Okay, want isn't an argument. Crawd asks, can I debate you about open borders if possible? Sure, there's a, let's see here. There is this article in which we'll go over how to get in touch with me. I'll just send into the chat. I respond specifically to this question. There we go.
Want to see. It's not going to be what any of us want to see. Thank you guys very much.
5 minutes better from Alex.
Travel is a natural right. Don't believe me? Just read John Locke's essay on naturalization. John Locke, one of the founders and most important people in the Enlightenment and a great inspiration to libertarians since then. Dave made the point in the last several minutes, right before his 5-minute thing, about how Alex has this presumption of liberty. You're darn right I do. You're darn right I have a presumption of liberty when it comes to immigration and everything else. Michael Huemer, the libertarian philosopher in Colorado, who's written some of the best essays on this and other libertarian topics, also calls it a presumption of liberty. So I'm like very happy to be lumped in with what I consider to be the most prominent libertarian philosopher and anarcho-capitalist in the world today who agrees with me on this topic. When it comes to all of the problems that Dave has pointed out, public schools, welfare, all this stuff, I agree. Great arguments against public schools. Great arguments against welfare. Also great arguments, but not good arguments against immigration. They are arguments that are just as good against having children as they are against immigration. Take every argument he raised and replace the word immigrant with having children. And see if that argument...
Yeah, Monhop for $8. Thank you very much. Dave's fabled I have children theory of rights. Truly a groundbreaking discovery for the philosopher. Yeah, I mean, he does this all the time. Well, when you have kids, you just start thinking differently. He did this in his Andrew Wilson debate as well, where it's like, well, yeah, when I started having kids, I started thinking, it's like, yeah, when you had kids, you stopped being a libertarian. Like, just say it, bro.
It makes sense, because the logic is identical. It is identical. And if you oppose government restrictions on peaceful people or on just anybody having kids, then you have to oppose government restrictions on peaceful and healthy people crossing the border. We want to see continuously, and I don't think Dave has dealt with this once, he continuously assumes that immigrants coming here are uninvited or they're not welcome. Well, I want to point you guys to something called the market economy and labor markets. Americans want to hire these folks. They want to rent to them. They want to buy from them. They want to sell to them. They want to deal with them.
And also further, you go down to any shop, you pass a shop, you'll see a sign on the door which says open. It's inviting anybody out there to come on in and browse their goods. So everybody has been invited. This is an argument I believe that Ace Archist came up with. So everyone's been invited.
That is the vast, vast majority of immigration in the United States. That's why people come here unlawfully, and the government gets in the way from stopping them. When I came here this morning from Virginia on a train, nobody's going to make the argument that I violated a bunch of people's rights on the way just because I bought a ticket and got a hotel room and bought a slice of pizza on the way here. This was all voluntary. So what if, instead of taking the train from Virginia, I took the train from Canada? Is there any difference? Borders are ethically irrelevant when it comes to libertarianism. They are irrelevant when it comes to this stuff. The borders exist to keep out other governments. They do not exist to keep out peaceful and healthy people, and that's the way that we should take it, and that's the way that we should look on this. Dave, I think, is using the language of libertarianism to justify some preferences that I don't think are supported or at all consistent with libertarian principles. There are really only two political movements in the world, and there always have been only two. On one side is power, and the other side is individual liberty. And I want you to think to yourself tonight, Who was the person up here defending liberty and who was defending power? Who was the person who was supporting the power of the state, funded by taxpayers, to send armed guards and armed individuals to tear people away from their voluntary contracts, mutually beneficial relationships, and remove them from the United States? Who was the person who was in favor of having restrictions on the border, to check people out, to build a wall, to lionize and to support President Trump saying things, putting up a bat signal that stops people from coming here? Do you know why that bat signal is effective? It's supported by violence. It's supported by the state. It's supported by...
Yeah, that's an effective counter to the bat signal point. It's like, well, this bat signal you're talking about is actually a threat of violence against innocent people. So it's a crime. The bat signal shouldn't exist.
Trillions of dollars of taxpayer money. It's supported by activating the military and the largest law enforcement apparatus in the history of this country. That is the pro-power position that is dominated and supported by Dave in this debate. My position is one of liberty. My position is the one that Americans and immigrants should be free to interact without government interference on the terms that they mutually agree upon. That is individual liberty. That is individual freedom. That is free market capitalism. That is libertarianism. Thank you.
All right, yeah, so, I mean, yeah, to wrap up, like, what really needs to be done with people like Dave Smith here is just to attack them on the philosophical grounds. Say, like, hey, your philosophy is the philosophy of pragmatism. You believe in the primacy of consciousness. This is a stolen concept fallacy, and your knowledge of libertarian theory is lacking at best. This is sort of what you need to do here. Nothing else really cuts it. Yeah, I mean, thank you everyone for coming along. Thought it was a blast. I'll see you again for a debate on Friday about David Friedman's theory of rights.